Hello and welcome to this meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville Council. Madam Clerk, do we have any regrets this evening?
We have regrets from Councillor Sandhu.
Thank you. Council, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Madam Clerk, I see none. Would two of us like to move and second into Committee of the Whole? Councillor Adams, Councillor Lischina, thank you. Any objection? There being none, the motion carries, and we are now in the relaxed rules of the Committee of the Whole to facilitate the public consultation that this meeting is for. Council, I would like to change the agenda slightly. I'd like to ask you to consider the heritage minutes first, and then I'd like to ask you if anybody is interested in having a discussion on the 4 items under number 7 in the agenda. And if no one does want to discuss those 7, I would solicit a motion for, and perhaps given the nature of item 7.3, I think it is, perhaps Councillor Grant, you might like to be the mover. And is everybody okay with that? Is there any objection? Councillor Adams, you are objecting. What would you like?
With respect to 7.4, the NIGA Urban Core Background Preliminary Directions Report, I wondered if staff would be able to tell us more about the consultation process that they're going to use.
All right, well then,
I'm okay with everything else though.
all right. Mr. Garvey or Mr. Charles, would you like to see if you can satisfy the councillor quickly? And I'm coming to Councillor Knoll next.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. In terms of the next steps with the consultation, we will be working through that and be able to report back to council on our strategy for getting information out to the public, developers, etc., as well as through our social media. So we will be reporting back on how we will be consulting and the extent of that.
Okay, thanks. So there's more to come on that. Very good.
All right, Councillor Knoll and then Councillor Haslett-Deal.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry I was very slow on the uptake when you called for a declaration of pecuniary interest. In the abundance of caution, I'm going to declare pecuniary interest in 5.2, which is, I believe it's 5.2.
5.1.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm going to declare the interest in 5.1. It relates to a property which is next to and could impact the property in which I run my business. So just for absolute comfort of everybody involved, I'm going to absent myself from discussions or voting on that particular item.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Councillor Haslett-Deal, how can we help you? Let me help you first by asking you to unmute.
Sorry about that. So I have 2 questions. One is on 5.1, just in regards to, will it come back to council?
We're not on,
after
Councillor, we're not considering 5.1 or 5.2. We're only trying to clear away the heritage item number 9 and the 4 items in part 7 of the agenda.
Okay, so my other question then is about just 7.4. So the consultation part, I appreciate it from Councillor Adams. There's some language in it around employment conversion. I just like some confirmation that that consultation and that work, there's language in the North Oakville plan around employment use and about light industrial uses. And in particular, it speaks to being more compatible with residential communities. Will that language be part of the consultation? Because it's important language. We are living without that language in livable Oakville, and I just wanted a confirmation that that will be a discussion point when we get to that consultation.
Councillor, the answer is yes.
Thank you.
May I call the vote? Councillor Grant has moved the heritage items under 9 and the 4 items under 7. And is there any objection to the motion? on the off chance that Councillor Hassett-Thiel's hand is not up, her electronic hand is up. I'm going to pretend that's not an objection. Thank you for taking it down. I'll declare the motion carried. Thank you, everybody, for your help and your cooperation on our meeting efficiency tonight. So now, we come to the consent items, which I had meant to include in that, but going around and round about 7 and everything distracted me. I'm looking for a motion to pass the consent items, the public consent item and the confidential consent item. Councillor Grant. Thank you for the motion. Councillor Duddick.
Your worship, I apologize, but I believe this is the item that Councillor Hassett-Thiel wanted to raise earlier, 5.1 or 5.2.
Well, that's right, and here we are. So, Councillor Hassett-Thiel.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. So my question on 5.1 is, will the, I don't know how to ask this one, will it come back to council for final approval?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor, if you were referring to the last sentence of my report, yes. I didn't seek specific instructions with respect to that matter.
Okay, thanks very much.
All right, Council, we're going to have a vote on the consent item 4.1. Is there any objection to that item on Councillor Grant's motion? I don't see any, and that's carried. Now we're going to have a separate vote on 5.1 so that Councillor Knoll can avoid voting on his declared conflict of interest. Is there any objection to this motion? There's none, and the minutes will show that Councillor Knoll did not vote or participate. Thank you, everybody. Now, 5.2, we just need a motion to receive that report. Councillor Duddick, thank you. It was a race. We had everybody wanting to help. All right, any objection to receiving the motion? I see none, that's carried. All right, now we come to our first of 2 public hearing items. We have the public meeting report and the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment applications at 2266 Lakeshore Road West and 83 East Street. We have a presentation from Robert Thunn, our senior planner, and we have many delegations registered. And I just say at the start, as Mr. Thunn will himself during his presentation for the public who are tuned in for this, that you can add your voice to this item if you call 905-815-6095, and you'll be connected to the meeting and you'll be called upon to speak following the 12 registered delegations that we already have on this. And I'll just emphasize for everybody, as Mr. Thunn will too, that this is an issues collecting meeting. Staff in the public report have already listed the issues that they've identified. And the point of tonight's contributions by the public and by members of council is to identify additional issues to be added to staff's consideration of the matter. If you're delegating and all you want to say is don't approve it, that's fine. You can say whatever you want, but I hope it's helpful to you to know the purpose of this meeting, which is to collect issues against which to judge the application. Mr. Thunn, we are all ears, and we're looking forward to your summary of the application for the benefit of the public who may not have seen it.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Burton and members of council. Tonight, an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment application have been submitted by 2266 Lakeshore LP for the development of approximately 0.38 hectares of land located on the southeast corner of Lakeshore Road West and East Street. The report can be found as item 6.1 on tonight's agenda. And as you have mentioned, as with all statutory public meetings, tonight's presentation is to introduce the application to council and the public and to obtain any further comments for review as related to this application. As you have seen, Mayor Burton and members of council, many public comments have already been received and have been distributed to council since the report was made public. And once again, the number on the screen, 905-815-6095, is for further public input, should the public so wish. Thank you. Slide, please. The air photo identifies the site and its context with the surrounding area. So the bold black is the subject property. It's made up of 3 properties. 2266 or 2262 and 2266 Lakeshore Road West. These are the most westerly portions of the property, and 83 East Street, right at the intersection of Lakeshore Road and East Street. To the immediate east of the site is a 9-story and a 12-story seniors complex. A little further to the east is a 15-story building. Immediately to the south of this property is a 17-story building. Further to the west are 2-story residential building and also commercial uses. And to the north, you have a gas station and the TD Bank. Slide, please. So the application that is before us related to the zoning bylaw amendment is related to a 15-story mixed-use building. That mixed-use building contains 245 residential units, which are proposed to be rental, and 446 square meters of at-grade commercial. The proposal also includes 273 parking spaces, of which 245 are for the residents and 28 are for the commercial and visitors. These are primarily located in the underground area, and there are 4 levels of underground parking. Also included in this proposal is a 417 square meter publicly accessible but privately owned open space area immediately on the corner of Lakeshore Road West and East Street. And unfortunately, your worship, the cursor may not work, but it's right at the southeast corner of Lakeshore and East Street. Within the building itself, on the 3rd floor, there's a private amenity space or courtyard area that is central in the sort of the notch of the V-shaped building. And on the roof, or the 15th floor, is a rooftop amenity area, and you can see that as part of the site plan and a little bit on the rendering. Vehicular access to the site will be from East Street, as is the residence access into the building. The proposed ground floor commercial units will have access from both Lakeshore Road and East Street. As seen on the rendering on this slide, the building is a step back above the 6th story, both from Lakeshore Road West and from East Street. On those 2 frontages, they are proposing a 1 meter setback. For the easterly setback and the southerly setback, they're looking at 7.5 meters. As with all applications, your worship, members of council, a virtual public information meeting was held on August 10th. 70 members of the public were in attendance at that meeting. A second courtesy meeting was held on September 14th for those members of the public who couldn't attend the August 10th meeting. And at that meeting, there were 56 members of the public. There were also meetings held with the BIA and the Bronte Village Residents Association. Slide. Thank you. The subject land is designated Main Street 2 in the Liverpool Oakville plan and is identified as the lands eligible for bonusing. That Main Street 2 designation allows for a variety of uses, including retail and service commercial and residential uses. The ground floor is to be primarily used for retail and service commercial uses. The permitted height in the Main Street 2 is 4 to 6 stories. An additional 4 stories in height may be considered in accordance with the Liverpool Oakville's bonusing policies to a maximum of 10 stories. So that's 4 additional stories. The intersection of Lakeshore Road West and East Street, as you can see from the lower right-hand side, has been identified on Schedule P2 to the Liverpool Oakville plan as a gateway location to Bronte. So that's the entrance into Bronte from the east end of town going west. The applicant's application proposes to permit a 15-story mixed-use building, as mentioned, which is 9 stories would be achieved through bonusing. The applicant's OPA can be found in Appendix A1 of the staff report. Slide, please. From a zoning perspective, the subject property is zoned H1 MU1 as illustrated on the left-hand side of the screen. The purpose of the holding provision is to ensure that matters such as water and wastewater, stormwater management, road infrastructure, and a Section 37 bonusing agreement have been satisfactorily addressed. The M1 zone is a mixed-use zone. It permits a variety of uses, including but not limited to apartment dwellings, restaurants, and service commercial establishments. The zoning permits a minimum height of 2 stories and a maximum of 4. From a metric, it's 7.5 and 15 meters in the zoning bylaw. The existing zoning for the site, as mentioned in the staff report, has not yet been updated to reflect the Main Street 2 designation of the Liverpool Oakville plan. The applicant has proposed to amend the MU1 zoning regulations, including height, number of stories, and bonusing provisions, to name a few, to permit this proposed development. The applicant's zoning bylaw amendment can be found in Appendix A2 to the staff report. The holding 1 provision would remain on the site until such a time as the relevant matters have been addressed. Slide, please. The slide before council are matters that have been identified or issues that have been raised to date. They include matters such as the bonusing, policy implications, urban design, the public or the privately owned public accessible open space, which is called the POPs. Is the MU1 zone appropriate? Matters related to the amount of commercial space, the number of parking spaces. So a number of matters have been addressed, but this is not the entire list. Comments from tonight will be included onto this list, as well as technical comments that are still forthcoming on the application. And those matters will be addressed as part of the future recommendation report. Slide, please. So in conclusion, Your Worship, staff are putting forth the following recommendation for council's consideration. As mentioned, the additional comments received tonight will form part of the record and will be addressed as part of the future recommendation report. Thanks very much, Councillor and Mayor Burton.
Thank you, Mr. Thun, for your customary great job on presenting the file. Council, as is our usual custom, I thought we would call the delegations and then reserve our comments and issues to be added to the list till after we've heard from the public. Is that agreeable again? Thank you very much. I'll take that for agreement. Madam Clerk, would you call the delegations, please?
Our first delegation is Leah and John Wilkening.
Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much.
Council looks forward to your information.
Let me see, okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. My comments reflect the number of bonusing variances that have been allowed over the past short number of years since we've lived here in Oakville, and represent what I consider a question as to whether or not the property really meets the moral responsibility for real property as part of the Act to the Human Rights Code with respect to Section 9.2 and responsibility for real property. And part of that section is that each person has the moral responsibility to ensure that his or her real property is maintained to a presentable standard in keeping with such factors as the legal uses to which the property is put and the character of the community in which the property is located. As this building is over 300 times 300% of the maximum stories that is currently allowed for that community. I think my issue would be that allowing this bonusing would amount to a forced urbanization of our community that was not ever approved by the residents. The Livable Oakville plan is, we're aware of that as a resident, but the number of buildings that are growing in size in our community is forcing an urbanization on us that we did not agree to when we moved into this community. My primary concern is for the seniors in our community who are already being priced out of our community. And I'm concerned that this would materially contribute to the material change in the character of our community, and those who are seniors in our community would be the most impacted. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the time and the care you took in presenting your views. Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, would you call the next delegation?
Sorry, Your Worship, I have my hand up here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor O'Meara, did you want to question the delegate?
Yeah, I appreciate the comments. I want to thank you very much, Leah, for that. I guess my question is, when did you move into the community, Leah?
We're almost a decade, and most of our neighbors have been here for 40 or more years.
So did you take part in the Bronte area growth official plan review from, it was almost about 3 or 4 years, from 2014 to 2017?
We were in some of the meetings, but so we know that there's this growth plan. We understand where it's coming from through the province. I've been part of those meetings that you've presented at. Yes, I wasn't aware that the growth plan meant skyscrapers on most corners.
But you are aware of the Bronte growth area plan,
Yeah.
and that and its intensification, and it is one of 6 Oakville growth nodes. You get that, right?
I do.
Okay.
But growth is a relative term, right? So growth could be, 6 stories, growth could be 8 stories, or growth could be 20 or 15.
I'm with you, and I'll tell you, Councillor Elgar will tell you all about growth and forecast numbers and targets. So we're all on the same page, but we do know that the province is mandating growth in Oakville, and it's got to go somewhere. And we went through a very long and extensive public consultation about where and how we try and fit growth in our town of Oakville as mandated by the province. So I appreciate your comments, and they're totally relevant, and I really do appreciate your comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right. I think I could now ask the clerk to call the next delegation. Thank you, Ms. Wilkening.
Next delegation is Harry Shaw, who is Vice President of the Bronte Village Residents Association.
Welcome, Mr. Shea. Council looks forward to your information. And you have the Zoom or the floor, whatever we're calling it.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship and members of Town Council. My name is Harry Shea, and I'm a resident of the Lighthouse. Tonight, you will hear how this application does not respect the tireless efforts which have gone into creating the Livable Oakville Plan, the Bronte Village Growth Review, and the current zoning bylaw. My delegation tonight speaks to 3 other concerns regarding this application. The first is construction. I don't blame you if you're wondering why bring up construction now when it's dealt with at site plan. Here are my 3 reasons. First, tonight's statutory meeting regarding this application is for residents to share their concerns. Second, there may not be a second statutory meeting within the required 120 days on December the 11th. So tonight may be the public's only opportunity to be heard regarding this application. And finally, site plan is no longer open to the community as it's discussed behind closed doors. Bringing forward this subject tonight is the responsible thing to do. Let me first begin by saying construction will be intensified by a magnitude of 3 if the developer gets what they are asking for as compared to the as of right zoning. The entire dynamic surrounding construction changes significantly when going from 4 to 6 stories to the proposed 15. We can stay on the same slide. Given the traffic volume on Lakeshore Road West, it is unrealistic to think that traffic will be stopped each time ingress egress is required to enter the construction site. So what's the alternative? It is, of course, East Street. For those who are not boaters or not intimately familiar with this area, the parking lot entrance for the Bronte Outer Harbor Marina is at the base of East Street. Boats that are not stored over the winter at the marina traverse East Street for a straight line access into the parking lot versus traveling west on Ontario Street. When the developer secures the construction site at its property line, it's highly probable that the developer will need additional space to queue up dump trucks as they excavate, followed by concrete trucks, and then delivering construction materials. Will East Street then be reduced to 1 lane so as to accommodate construction staging? If so, this will make East Street one way, and what's the impact to the surrounding side streets? Also, what service roads will the construction vehicles travel to get to the work site, and where will they queue? How will the developer ensure safety of the pedestrians either on Lakeshore Road or on East Street? A fair number of Oscar residents require a walker. It's important that children and parents alike feel safe avoiding this construction area when crossing Lakeshore to get to school. How will this be dealt with? Under Section 59 of the Ontario Occupational Health and Safety Act, dust is a hazard to the health of the workers. But how about dust as a hazard to the health of seniors living in Oscar and the neighboring residents of the Lighthouse? How will dust be mitigated daily during construction? Parking is already at a premium in Bronte, and we are subject to predatory towing, so where will the workers park? It's reasonable to think it will be the construction trailer. It's reasonable to think it will not be located on the actual site, so where does it go? Furthermore, I'm not here to question whether jet ground columns will be inserted into the vertical walls to provide stability or to fill voids or to any other specific geotechnical topics. I'm here to speak to a bigger issue. This site is 3 blocks from the lake, without hydrology surveys, which the town has not conducted. Knowing conclusively what the subsurface holds is subject to speculation, as the current boreholes is a representative snapshot and not a comprehensive survey of the area. Notwithstanding the Ontario building codes, it is a hollow comfort to know that the surrounding properties like the Lighthouse have civil litigation as its remedy in the future for any structural damage caused during construction, which is why special attention must be devoted toward appropriate due diligence now when preparing the construction plan and carefully monitoring throughout construction. So let me close this topic by saying we often hear phrases like construction is temporary. Construction never lasts. Construction activities themselves may be temporary in nature, but the actual effects of construction can be permanent and long-lasting. Think Surfside, Florida. Next slide, please. In this slide, you see this magnificent tree canopy, which will be lost. What you don't see is Aberdeen House. This is the property the developer never mentions by name, but only refers to as the orphan property. Well, this orphan has 28 mature trees on it. This tree canopy will be lost forever. Next slide, please. The developer in their first PIM presentation included in their slide deck a slide on their sustainable design elements. The goals looked admirable. Who would want to argue against building into this proposed development sustainable design elements? I certainly would not. As the co-chair of the Oakville Energy Task Force, this slide caught my attention. I wanted to learn more. I wanted the developer to expand and clarify their sustainable goals for this proposed development. So I reached out with my questions. Candidly, their answers lacked any specificity. When asked to provide details, their answers were no modeling and no targets have been finalized. Well, how can they optimize investment planning without models? The developer speaks to the OBC and yet ignores the town community's energy strategy. They claim they will exceed the OB standards for efficiency, but you'll understand my lack of enthusiasm with their answers because without any specificity to the actual percentage increases to the OBC standards, their claims ring hollow. With regards to HVAC, we are told residents will receive an onboarding package with energy ratings. And that sounds more like equipment ratings when the Oakville Community Energy Plan calls for a guaranteed whole building approach. The developer says when discussing their claims for high efficiency building enclosures that no commissioning approach has been confirmed at this time. But they're sidestepping the question, is the overall approach for an active commissioning confirmed? Will an audit be conducted post-construction and repairs made to the building accordingly? I echo staff's concern outlined in their public meeting report with this application when they write what sustainable design techniques or systems are being explored to address the town's climate emergency. My concern, the developer is just ticking boxes to gain support from the community, the region, and U-Town Council, but who's going to know in the future whether these aspirational goals are ever met? And by then, it's too late. Next slide, please. I asked that staff have the developer bring forward the construction plan before December 11th, so the community is aware of how the developer will deal with our concerns regarding the impact of construction. And I asked staff to ensure that the developer's geothermal system array be designed to be compatible with the future municipal utility service companies' network access. In closing, I asked Town Council to once again reaffirm the Livable Oakville Plan, the Bronte Village Growth Review, and uphold the current zoning bylaws by rejecting this development application as submitted, as it falls considerably outside these well-established policies. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Shea, for your information. And we appreciate the time you put into it. Councilor O'Meara, you have your hand up again?
I do, Your Worship. Thank you. Thanks so much, Harry. And just to clarify, you said you were speaking on behalf of a resident of the Lighthouse, so it's not on behalf of the BVRA then, just on your own?
Well, we have, Shelly will be speaking on behalf of the BVRA. I mean, that was an extemporaneous comment by the town clerk. I was listing myself as a resident of the Lighthouse, but in full disclosure, I am a member of the, I'm on the board of the BVRA.
Okay, yeah, no, I think it's great for council colleagues to know, who's speaking on behalf of who here. And my other question, I know we did mentioned it before. A lot of your questions and your concerns related to site plan, and I did offer this before, but it's something that council does have the authority to do. Would it ally most of your concerns, and in particular the construction ones, which you and I know are a major issue? Would you be more comfortable if we were able to bring site plan back to council then, and you can have those, we can have those thorough public vettings of the technical details back to council, and we get another crack at those? Would that help or go?
It would indeed. Thank you.
Pardon me?
Yes, that would indeed. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Harry. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Robertson. Perhaps I could help you by asking you to.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Harry. I'm very, very interested in the environmental piece of this, because you're right. In the public presentation by the developer, the sounds of everything they were doing environmentally seemed very, very positive. So I don't know if this is going to become something for staff in terms of how do we make sure that a developer that comes in with a specific proposal meets the promises they made in terms of environmental. So I will just take that, and probably it morphs into a question for staff versus a question for Harry, but I do support you on that completely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Madam Clerk, would you call the next delegation?
Our next delegation is Linda Sinelli.
Ms. Sinelli, welcome to council. We look forward to your information. And Ms. Sinelli, I think you need to unmute yourself. If
I'm
my
muted now.
There you go.
Can you hear? Okay. Good evening, Mayor Burton, town councilors, and members of the community. My name is Linda Sinelli, and I am a long-term owner and resident of Bronte. To quote from the Bronte planning study, Diamond and Mayor affirmed, quote, "Many residents say Bronte's history is and should be part of the character of the present community." Founded in 1834, Bronte became a working-class community with the building of the grist mill. While the village of Bronte has progressed and reinvented itself over the years, Bronte residents have always maintained a sense of pride in our history and have endeavored to preserve both our history and unique identity. We strive for a healthy and vibrant community that respects the safety and well-being of all its residents. The participation of the community and support of the Livable Oakville Plan and in the Bronte Village Growth Review, the town and residents have put forward what they believe is the best way to achieve this. Great consideration was given to the need to revitalize our commercial district, respect the province's requirement for intensification, and enhance our village so that Bronte is not just a place to live. It is a lifestyle. It is a community. This is from the Livable Oakville Plan Policy Framework, 2.1 mission statement. To enhance the town's natural, cultural, social, economic environments by ensuring that environmental sustainability, cultural vibrancy, economic prosperity, and social well-being are incorporated into the growth and development decisions. With this in mind, and in accordance with the province mandate, the Oakville Livable Plan zoned these three properties, MU1, 2 to 4 stories, and in 2017, Bronte Village Growth Review adjusted this to Main Street to 4 to 6 stories. With total disregard for the LOP, the plan the developer proposes calls for a 15-story building with a height of 50.3 meters. This application would even exceed the MU4 zoning that allows 12 stories and a maximum height of 43 meters. This proposal is disrespectful to the Livable Oakville Plan, is not acceptable or appropriate to the land space, and is not in keeping with the Village of Bronte. JM Lakeshore Bronte Inc., the 6-story proposed development at the corner of Bronte and Lakeshore, and Amica, the 4-story proposed development on Lakeshore at Sammy's chip site, are at the site planning stage with no opposition because they are in accordance with the LOP as of right zoning. We support and encourage development that respects the LOP zoning of 4 to 6 stories and the character of the community. This application is in excess in every sense of the word and is totally contrary to the Livable Oakville Plan. I respectfully request that the council reject this application as it stands. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you very much for your information. We appreciate the time you took to share that with us. Madam Clerk, would you call the next delegation?
The next delegation is Reed Bracken.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
We can. Welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Perfect. Thank you. My name is, as earlier stated, Reed Bracken. I am a relatively new resident of Oakville, having moved here just this past October. So over COVID, obviously, my wife and I have spent a lot of time walking around the neighborhood and spending a lot of time in Bronte Village. And to pick up some interest in my community, I started reading into this development application. And I just wanted to say that I support this application. And there's a few aspects that I thought were given strong consideration by the developer. Specifically, having walked along this stretch of Lakeshore, I can't help but notice it does feel a little bit barren. And I really love the outdoor community space that the developer has proposed, and I like how that ties into the building. So myself, I have a young daughter, and I can totally see myself sitting and stopping there on our walk back over to our home with our dog, and just using this spot as a little mid-walk break. And I thought that was a nice touch by the developer. Additionally, I hear all the other residents' concerns on size of the building and whatnot, but I can't help but notice that it is also a rental building. Being in my early 30s, I am very much aware of the affordability issue within the greater Toronto area. And I can't help but think that, you know, a rental building like this might free up some more single family housing supply for some of my other young professional colleagues that are in Toronto that might look to relocate out here and start families of their own. Furthermore, I do think the development from a design perspective is unique, and I think it adds some character to the lakeshore skyline here. Again, I feel like the setbacks from the street are appropriate. I feel like incorporating that into the development has made it not feel as large as I think some of the other residents who voiced their concerns may think. The only other thing I would say is I have also looked up the developer quite extensively, as this is now turned into a little bit of a passion project. And I have seen that they have done some successful projects in some other communities that I think kind of bear similar qualities to this development. And from what I've seen, they've done a good job in pretty much every community. Obviously, I don't live in those, but one of the communities in particular is my hometown, Kingston, which my parents live in. I know they've done some successful projects there. So all in all, I think this type of development should be encouraged. I can't help but feel the pressure as a younger resident, just chatting with some of my other friends looking to move to a great town like Oakville. I think this would just be another great option for whether that's some older folks that might look to downsize to free up some single family space, or even just some young professionals that want to move here and get away from the noise of Toronto. So that's really all my comments. I want to support this development. I think council should strongly consider the positive impact it will have for the community.
Thank you very much for the time you took to bring that information to council. Councilor O'Meara, do you have a question for this delegation?
I do, Your Worship. Thank you very much, and thanks, Reid, for your comments. A lot of what we've heard, actually, even prior to this meeting, has been heights. I'm wondering if you can maybe give me your sense on the height there and how you feel about the height of the proposed development.
I think, to be honest, I don't think the height is as big of an issue as other residents may think it is. Maybe that's just because I've lived in Toronto for the last 10 years. But I do think that the way that they've incorporated the retail at grade, the podium, and then the setbacks from the podium, and then also the outdoor public space, I think that all kind of makes the height more manageable. So for me, maybe it's just because I'm younger. I don't think the height is as big of an issue, but I think that the way that they've designed everything all together in this development makes the height a lot more palatable than some of the other people that have commented. So I personally don't think the height's a big deal. If anything, it's more rental supply. And I think the biggest issue prior to COVID was a supply. And I think if we have more height, that means there's more rental supply, and maybe some of my friends from Toronto that are looking to start families can come rent a unit here, or buy a home from somebody that might choose to downsize and still live in the Bronte Village. So I think the height's appropriate for this development.
Thank you very much, Reid. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, everybody. Madam Clerk, would you please call the next delegation?
Next delegation is Martin Mentis.
Mr. Menges, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Good evening. Could I have my slides, please?
You may. I can see them working away on it right now.
Okay.
You can wait till we certainly won't start the clock on you until you've got your slides ready. I think we've got slides now.
Thank you very much. So good evening, Mayor Burton and town councillors, staff members, as well as members of the community. By way of introduction, my name is Martin Manches and I'm a resident of the Lighthouse, which is adjacent to the proposed 77 East Street site and is likely to be the most directly impacted should this development go ahead in its current form. I fully support the Livable Oakville plan, which guides future growth and change in our town. However, I'm concerned that the proposed development will change the character of the Bronte village and will set a dangerous precedent. As mentioned by Mr. Thun, an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment has been submitted to facilitate the development of a 15-story, and I would insert 50.5 meter tall mixed-use building at what we know is also 77 East Street. The official plan amendment proposes to maintain the existing Main Street 2 delegation, but increase the height, the maximum height to a site of just 15 stories with bonus in, whereas the site's maximum height is 6 stories and 10 stories with bonus in. I'm concerned of the impact of this proposed development will have on safety of pedestrians, on what it's going to do to obstructed sightlines, structural safety and integrity of adjacent buildings due to construction activities, traffic congestion, and also the building height and shadows on neighboring buildings. I therefore urge council to defend its current policies and zoning bylaws vigorously in a consistent and transparent manner. Could I have the next slide, please? In considering a new development, of utmost importance is its impact on 3 important pillars of safety, well-being, and security of the community as a whole. This should be a marker in determining what is the best, not only for the present, but also during construction and also for the long term. Although aspects such as building aesthetics are important, they pale in comparison to these 3 important pillars. The 3.5 or 4 levels, as it's referred to, of 77 East Street underground parking varies in depth below grade from 12.5 meters at Lakeshore Road West to 9.5 meters adjacent to the Lighthouse. To construct this underground garage and do its building foundations, the area will be excavated to the extremities of the property lines or the separation distances as indicated in red on the slide. And there will be vertical faces on all 4 sides. Now, I understand that there are building codes and regulations that must be adhered to, but what considerations has the developer made to ensure the safety of the pedestrians, a large portion being seniors, along the sidewalks of Lakeshore Road West and East Street? What about residents and visitors of our Lighthouse that are either on our pool deck or within the parking areas adjacent to the development? And also, what about the residents from the existing Oscar? There will be obstructed sightlines for vehicle egress from the Lighthouse or 77 East during the construction period and when the development is completed due to insufficient setback on East Street. Neighbor children either walk or driven to the elementary school that is on the East Street north of Lakeshore. There are also seniors, some of whom use mobility devices and walkers, as well as parents with strollers, as well as cyclists. All are at risk. Blind spots create a high risk for car accidents and pedestrians of all ages, either being hit, seriously injured, or even killed. Since vehicle egress to 77 East will be from East Street, which is really a 2-lane secondary street, it does not have enough lanes to carry any large volumes of traffic. There are safety concerns as to traffic congestion for residents of the new development, the Lighthouse, as well as Ennis Clare, Reflection Bay, Sir Richard Towers, as well as residents on East Street and Marine Drive areas who are traveling north on East Street to access Lakeshore Road, east or west. Traffic snarls from these going north on East Street and turning either east or west on Lakeshore Road with pedestrians crossing. Also, since East Street is also an access and exit from the Bronte Waterfront Park and a boat harbor, it's not only our immediate building residents, but it's also other Oakville residents who will also be impacted. Could I have next slide, please? I wish to just talk a little bit to the proximity to the Lighthouse. The drawings indicate a separation distance of 25.35 meters to the Lighthouse, but this does not consider our building balconies on that side of the building. The 77 East underground parking walls are within 3 meters of our property line. This proximity of 77 East relative to our Lighthouse, which is a 40-plus-year-old building, is like the scenario where Champlain Towers in Surfside, where the residents commented that the entire building was shaken during construction of the adjacent tower. We need to have the assurance from the developer that this will not be the case with the 77 East development. Next slide. So I wish to just talk a little bit to construction concerns and questions, and I know Harry Shea has mentioned it, but a geotechnical report has not been included in the submission. However, the phase 2 environmental site assessment report stated that drilling for this investigation was conducted on April 12th and 13th of 2021. 5 boreholes were advanced. 3 of the boreholes were advanced for concurrent geotechnical purposes. With 3.5 levels of parking for this proposed 77 East, the excavation below grade would be the area bounded by that property lines I showed you previously. So the following questions I raised to council. What is the developer's excavation and backfill methodology below 5 meters in that shale bedrock to approximately 9.5 meters at our property line? What is the recommended shoring design, and how would this be implemented at the property extremities? How will the integrity of the Lighthouse underground parking walls be maintained in the area of closeness? Will it be necessary for us to support our basement parking area walls during the excavation and construction period, thereby inconveniencing residents that park in that areas? I also ask, has a geotechnical analysis been carried out to assess possible impacts on the lighthouse? What strategy will be implemented to ensure no damage or subsidence or cracking of the lighthouse basement parking area, its walls, its pool deck, and the surface structures? This should include noise, vibration, and even shock impacts. More importantly, what guarantees will the Lighthouse Board be given to this effect, and for what period into the future? Will the developer install crack monitoring and vibration shock metering equipment at the lighthouse to monitor and record such activities? I urge the council to state that the developer should provide a preliminary construction plan with details mitigating the above, and that indicates how and where construction vehicles, office trailers, storage areas, overhead craneage, etc., be located and managed. This should be submitted now as part of this application. I was also again concerned with the impacts of shadows caused by 77 East Street on the lighthouse amenity area as well as Oscar, but this is going to be further addressed by another resident shortly. So can I go to the next slide, please? So in conclusion, I wish to state again that I fully support the Livable Oakville plan, and I support the goal for Bronte Village. Bronte Village is envisaged as a vibrant community with a thriving commercial area and a variety of housing opportunities that provide a year-round environment for residents, employees, and visitors. I thank you. Let the future generations be proud of the decisions we make today. Please uphold the current bylaws and policies for the site and help to promote balanced growth. I thank you for this opportunity afforded to me to present my case today.
Thank you very much for your information and all the detail you provided. Councilor O'Meara, you have a question for the delegation?
I do, Your Worship, and thank you so much, Martin, for those comments. I know we spoke prior about those comments, and a lot of that's above my head. It's in a lot of the building code and concerns about construction and those sorts of things. I'm wondering if at a point in time to help assist you with that, if we had our professional staff and engineers and builders maybe speak with you, if that might, no matter what gets built there, it doesn't matter whether it's a 4-story or you know, the CN Tower, if that might help. If I'd be happy to arrange that if you feel that might be beneficial to you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. I would really enjoy that.
Perfect. So we'll take that offline, and thank you very much for that. And thank you for all your questions. And I know, especially living close to any development site, it doesn't matter what happens, there's always angst and anxiety and questions and concerns, and that's normal. And I appreciate that. So I'll take that back, and Councillor Robertson and I will connect you with our staff moving forward, no matter how this goes. So thank you for that, and thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Maybe I should footnote, we're not making a decision here tonight. We're only collecting issues. Staff will present a recommendation report months from now, and hopefully before the deadline where they become able to appeal. But anyway, decision is not tonight. Madam Clerk, would you please call the next delegation?
Next delegation is Peter Voice.
Welcome,
Yes,
Mr. Boyd.
it's Peter Boss. Thank you for having me on tonight and having the opportunity to speak.
We're hearing you fine. Please continue.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you again now. We lost you there for
sorry.
a while.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I've reviewed the planning justification report that was submitted, and I like to say, and generally speaking, I'm in support of the development. I think the building design itself is unique and befitting to Bronte. It incorporates an attractive design with the upper floors being stepped back and up. As well as also has that nice public space right at the corner of East Street and Lakeshore, creating a more inviting neighborhood feel. I look at the proposed building height it's in alignment with all the recent work that's happening in Bronte, especially looking down at Bronte Road and Lakeshore at that project. And then looking at all the existing buildings that are in place, it fits in. It's not like it's a towering monstrosity. It will fit into the skyscape very well. And I think overall this building, this development will improve the aesthetics of the Bronte Village, especially on the east end, as another person noted. It's kind of been looking a little on the rough side for quite a number of years. And it really does need to have a facelift. I'm also impressed by the developer looking at reducing the ratio of parking spots at this site to, in essence, a 1-to-1 ratio. I think this is a great step forward to help control the volume of cars on the roads in the Bronte area. And I use this as a great segue to my comments centered around the transportation network that will serve to support the Bronte residents today and in the future. And this is really the basis of my main concern, not so much of this project, but all the projects that have happened and are planning to be happening in the Bronte area. We're continuously growing either vertically or increasing the density in our community. But I'm not hearing a lot of discussions about the transit plans for our community. And I think if we want to proceed forward, we need to have a comprehensive transit plan in place. May your choice be by car, by bus, by bike, or by foot, or any combination thereof. We need solutions that will connect Bronte Village to all the key infrastructure gateways, such as the GO station up Bronte Road, or the QEW beyond that, or other parts of Oakville and Burlington. As a resident of, close to 40 years and 20 straight, I've witnessed an increased impact of the number of vehicles on the road, as well as traffic congestion up and down Third Line and Bronte Road. As we have grown, our community's grown, and the number of people having multiple cars sitting in their driveways has increased. And I'm seeing the time to travel up and down those roads is going up and up and up, and a lot of road congestion is occurring. If we go down the road to Lakeshore and Bronte, they just added 483 units with 614 parking spots. There's a proposal to do some development on the south side of Lakeshore Road at Bronte Road. So all I'm seeing is increased volume of cars being brought into quite a small community. Where are these cars going to go? How are we going to provide viable transit options to the community to avoid high levels of congestion and the pollution that comes with it? Some facts to consider: both Bronte Road and Third Lines are 1 lane each way south of Spears to Lakeshore. It's the same today as it was in the 80s when I moved here. And I guess it was the same for decades prior to that. Yet the population and car density has increased substantially over the years. Today, there is limited or non-existent safe dedicated bike lanes in place, and none that go directly up to the GO station from Bronte Village. So even if you wanted to bike, you do it at your own risk. I wouldn't do it, and I like biking, but I would never go up Third Line or Bronte Road. If we want to develop Bronte Village properly, we need to consider appropriate transportation planning. We need a bike path network that enables bikes to even pedestrians to safely transit from Bronte to the GO station. Perhaps we can leverage the Donovan Bailey Park Trail with an extended bike corridor to the GO station, or dedicated road-based bike corridors from Bronte to the GO station that are safe and separate from cars and maintained all years around. We need to look at expanding the number of lanes on Third Line and Bronte Road south of Spears to Lakeshore. I know there's a lot of people that would be against that, but the reality is, as long as we have as many cars on the road, we're going to need wider roads in that area. In summary, we must ensure high density development in Bronte and the attractiveness of the Bronte area are directly tied to an overall progressive transit plan that is respectful of people's time, so we're not sitting in cars or buses waiting to get from point A to B. Provide us viable options, such as a bike lanes. Be respectful to the environment, so our cars aren't sitting there idling while we're trying to move around, and be beneficial to the community we live in. We have the time, we have the know-how, it makes good sense. We just need to start doing this stuff and being not reactive to growth with a transit plans, but have that in parallel. And it's my sense that most of the time it's always a reaction after the fact, not as a parallel activity. So for the project itself, I'm all for it. I think we need to do it. It's the right thing to do. Other delegations have pointed out some really good positive aspects to it. And I respect that some delegations have concerns. And if I lived right next door, I probably would have as well. But I think a lot of the matters about construction techniques and whatnot can be overcome. Building close to other buildings is a norm, especially in Toronto or in other high density areas. So we're not chartering new roadways on this one. And hopefully the developer can help better educate all of us on how they're going to do it and delay some of our concerns. So with that, I thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you very much for providing your information. We appreciate the time you took. Madam Clerk, there don't appear to be any questions. Could you call the next delegation, please?
Next delegation is Jonathan McNeese.
Welcome, Mr. McNeese. Council looks
Worship.
forward to your information.
And I believe Good evening, Your Worship, councilors, staff, community members, and the applicants. My name is Jonathan McNeese. I'm here today to speak in regards to proposed development, the southeast corner of Lakeshore Road West and East Street. I have a background in urban planning, and I've worked for medium and large-sized municipalities in Ontario, Alberta, New York over the past dozen years. Additionally, 7 generations of my family have lived in Bronte and have always fought to preserve its unique history and character that makes it the great place that it is today. Next slide, please. I'd like to preface by saying that I'm not opposed to development on this site or in this area, but I have a number of specific concerns that what is being proposed through this development is not in line with the town of Oakville's livable Oakville plan. Next slide. The official plan amendment from the applicant proposes to maintain the existing Main Street 2 designation. The maximum height for Main Street 2 designation is 4 to 6 stories with bonusing up to 10 stories. The proposal seeks to increase the height inclusive of bonusing to 15 stories. The proposed bonusing provisions would permit an increase in the number of stories eligible for bonusing from 4 to 9 stories, more than doubling it. The proposed density and height is not in line with the Livable Oakville plan. Bonusing is already taken into account in the LOP, and a request for increasing it is inappropriate for a number of reasons. First, what is outlined in the LOP is already a considerable amount of height and density on a site that currently only has a few occupants and is not more than 2 stories high. Height and density is being embraced on this site by neighbors in the community, but it needs to be respectful and responsible to not present further negative externalities to the community. Second, section 4.1 of the LOP directs the highest levels of density in Oakville towards Midtown Oakville, Uptown Core, and Thornborough Village. These are places that are closer to highways, rapid transit, and have larger sites to better accommodate large buildings and density. Bronte Village, Kerr Village, and downtown Oakville are intended to accommodate lesser amounts of growth, as they are intended to have a mix of uses with viable main streets. There are many other sites on the main street of Bronte Village that can also be filled in to meet growth targets. Density and intensification does not need to be met on the proposed development site alone. Third, the Bronte GO Transit Station area study is currently being conducted. High density development such as the 77 East proposal would be more appropriate in the Bronte GO area, which is in line with provincial policy statement, as well as the growth plan, which directs growth where there is better infrastructure. The proposed development is a form of transit supportive development and should be directed towards this growth area. The Livable Oakville Plan Section 24 policies pertaining to Bronte Village, in my opinion, discourage this type of density that is being proposed because the Main Street character becomes compromised. The LOP has already identified appropriate development height that will allow for appropriate density at 4 to 6 stories in order to allow for a human scale and a viable Main Street. Next slide, please. Based on this visual of Bronte Village, the justification that is being proposed for the 77 East developments along the Main Street is that there is a number of tall buildings along Marine Drive. This is 2 completely different contexts. On the left, the Marine Drive corridor was envisioned and planned for higher density buildings many planning regimes ago and has the associated infrastructure to support it. Further, its tower in the park design minimizes the negative externalities on its neighbors. On the right, the historic Lakeshore Main Street area seeks to be pedestrian oriented. The buildings are less intimidated, predominantly the height of treetops. Therefore, the proposed building form of 77 East does not fit in with the Main Street area based on the justification that there are tall buildings along Marine Drive. Next slide, please. The proposed development is a site with a gateway designation. The applicant attests that they seek to balance the gateway locations on the east and west sides of the Main Street area by adding a tall building on their site to match the tall buildings at the Bronte Village Mall site. These 2 gateway sites are starkly different. The Bronte Village Mall site is a much larger site, about 5 times the area. That used to house a 1970s era mall. It can accommodate more parking, has a large urban square, has multiple access points, is predominantly set back from the Main Street, and the whole block has compatible development. Higher densities and height on this site makes sense as it is the urban core of the village. In comparison, the proposed 77 East development site is much smaller, 3 small lots joined together at the periphery of the village, yet it seeks similar height and density as the Bronte Village Mall site. While the building heights are similar, these are not apple-to-apple comparisons based on site locations and characteristics. If you were to balance the 2 gateways based on the site characteristics, the 77 East proposal would have to be greatly reduced. Next slide, please. Section 24.3.1 of the Livable Oakville Plan states that higher residential density shall be directed to the gateways of the district and serve to anchor Lakeshore Road West with Bronte Village as a main street. This has already been accounted for in the Livable Oakville Plan and the Bronte Village Growth Area Review by increasing the site's allowable heights on Main Street 2 designations and in addition making them eligible for bonusing. Section 24.4.6A of the LOP states that Gateway shall enhance the historic lakeside village character and can include well-designed built form or structure, distinctive streetscape treatment, landscaping, and or public art. Nowhere does it mention that height, density, or tall buildings are characteristics of Gateway. The eastern gateway, where this development is proposed, in fact already has a gateway treatment. The town of Oakville, including council, went to great lengths, efforts, and expense to create the existing gateway treatment, flags, and artistic concrete signage on 2 corners welcoming visitors to the village of Bronte. Next slide, please. In the interest of time, I am outlining some additional concerns that have been elaborated on by other speakers and can be investigated further by staff. Regarding bonusing and precedent, bonusing is a right, is not a right, it is a privilege and should be considered on a case-by-case basis. In this situation, bonusing was added to this site only because of the Bronte Village Growth Area Review, which at the time there was a concern that intensification was not being met in Bronte due to the fact that the Western Gateway, the Bronte Village Mall site, was stalled. And the town wanted to provide alternative site meet growth targets demand. However, since then, the villages is now under construction with occupancy coming soon and more units on the way that have not yet been absorbed into the market. Therefore, there is not the same pressure to allow more bonusing on other sites. Further, it was alluded to in the PIM that the bonusing would be the site features themselves, the environmental features of the building, the proposed waterfall and green wall, and a small top. This provides little benefit to the community as a whole, rather it serves the occupants of the development. By allowing bonusing or requesting more than double of the bonusing as sought through the OPA would set a dangerous precedent for the other sites at the corner of Lakeshore Road West and East Street. This and start to create a corridor of tall buildings along what is supposed to be a historic and viable main street. Parking. It is my opinion that the parking being provided for the site is grossly underestimated. Providing 1 parking space per unit, even though there are many 2 and 3 bedroom units, is not realistic outside of a high density urban area without already built infrastructure such as rapid transit and protected bike lane. The reality is that most people living in this proposed development will be driving a vehicle. At minimum, the parking rate of the town should be maintained. There are also concerns with visitor parking and providing enough parking for retail. If not enough parking is to be provided, then there will be an overflow and other places will have to accommodate it. Sustainability features. There are a number of environmental features that the developer has proposed to incorporate into the development, such as geothermal, green roofs, and electric charging stations. Though these features are not being guaranteed through the OPA, they are being sought in exchange for additional height. Many of these features are not new and they are already considered in Section 10 of the LOP, and in my opinion, does not go above and beyond to meet the policy requirements for bonusing. In conclusion, in review of the application you have before you today, I would ask that council seriously consider that there are a number of concerns from the community with regards to the proposed development. I have not heard anyone say that they are opposed to development on the site, but there is a feeling that this is far in excess of what is outlined in the LOP. I'm also concerned about how attainable and affordable a development like this will be to ensure that diversified housing options as encouraged by the PPS. In my opinion, the height is already considered in the LOP of 4 to 6 stories is appropriate, with 4 stories along the main street to provide a human scale, step back to 6 stories to accommodate additional density. As you can see in the images on this slide, 2 to 6 stories can provide more of a human scale while still accommodating density. Finally, I'd encourage staff to recommend staff recommendation to come back to council within a 120-day period. The site is already familiar through past applications, and the development review is a high priority for Bronte. Thank you for your time and consideration on this very important decision for Bronte's future. I'd be happy to take any questions now and throughout the review period. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McNeese, for your information and for squeezing as much of it as you did within the 10 minutes. We do appreciate that courtesy. Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you for the extra few seconds.
Councillor O'Meara has a question for you.
Yes.
Thanks so much. I thought that was awesome too. The timing on your thing, that's a thing of art, I'll tell you. I know we might not be able to go back unless IT staff can take us back to the height and density slide for a minute. Is that possible? I don't see numbers on the slide, so unfortunately I can't tell you.
Yeah, there was two, one with, yeah, this one?
Yeah, that's the right one. I guess my question is how those lines are drawn. How do you put a green line around an area and a blue line around an area, but still have a building that juts out in between the two? How does that happen?
That's sort of my point. So one area is a viable Main Street area. It's intended for a certain growth pattern. The other along Marine Drive is a tall building corridor. So that's the distinction between the two. And the planning justification report, the justification was that there was tall buildings in the area, but those buildings are on Marine Drive. So it's a much different context.
So that building then that's coming obviously into your green hash area should never have been approved then if it's jutting into that one then, is that correct?
Are you talking about the seniors building?
Whichever is right beside the red star on the left-hand side. There's
Yeah.
a building,
So sorry,
a tall building.
Okay, so there's the Oscar building that is just at the periphery. It's not in the viable Main Street area.
But it's in your little hash lines, right?
There might be 10% of it may be in the hash line, but if you look at the zoning map, that is not part of the Main Street area.
Okay, so how do you decide lines then, I guess? You're a planner. I mean, are lines important? How do lines go and where do lines get drawn? And how does, one side of the sidewalk decide one line and the other side of the sidewalk decides the other line? How important are lines?
Well, lines typically go based on lot lines or property lines. So this is for illustrative purposes to show that there is a large building corridor along Marine Drive that can accommodate height, density, and has a tower in the park design that helps prevent these externalities. The point is that along the Main Street area, you don't have those same site characteristics. It's a lot more lower scale, pedestrian oriented. And what they say, what's the height of pedestrian oriented? Typically, I've heard from designers, it's roughly something that's about as tall as a tree.
And then the very top right-hand corner of your line where the Bronte Village Mall is now, where would that line? I mean, this is obviously an older one. What would the height look at that in the top right-hand box of your green line there?
Yeah, so if you go to the next slide, that talks more about the gateway designations. And Councilor, I wouldn't get too hung up on the lines there. It wasn't meant to be an accurate depiction. It's more for illustrative purposes to make the point that there's a corridor of tall buildings. It's a Google image maps, probably not identical, but the illustrative purposes of it was that there's a tall building corridor, and then different from that is a viable Main Street corridor.
So the tall building corridor on the westernly portion is not part of the viability of the Main Street corridor? Is that what you're saying then?
So the Bronte Village Mall is a gateway.
Yeah.
Is a gateway site. So for those reasons, there is density and that's pushed towards that site. But in this slide here, I sort of distinguish between the two gateway sites. One is much smaller than the other, about by proportion of about 5.
So you're saying that the properties in question right now are not subject to the same gateway elements that the Bronte Village Mall gateway elements are?
What I'm saying is you need to take it into context. So they do have different site characteristics. They have different access points. They have different, one has a small parkette, the other has a large village square. And that's outlined by the asterisks coming from the plan at the top.
But are they both designated under our official plan as gateway areas, gateway locations?
They are gateway, but I would say you have to take into account the context of the site.
So they're both gateways, but they should be treated differently then. Is that what you're saying?
I would say you would take into account the context of the site. If one site is 5-6 times larger than the other, I would think you would take that into consideration. If one has more access points than the other, I would take that into consideration. If one has a large public urban square, I would take that into consideration.
So does our zoning or official plan nail down to that detail where it's only a gateway under certain considerations?
I think that's left open for interpretation, and what I'm providing is my interpretation of that.
Perfect. Okay, thank you, Your Worship. Thank you very much, Jonathan. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor.
Okay, thank you very much for that exchange. Madam
I think
Clerk.
maybe one, Councillor Robertson, I think, has her hand up.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Robertson.
Yeah. I think she's up. There we go.
Could you go back to the slide with the gateways for a second?
Sure. Or I can't, but somebody can.
Thank you to IT. Okay, what I am confused about in this whole thing is the fact that when you show the size of the village piece where Bronte Village Mall was, you include the green that also currently has Farm Boy and Rexall in that.
Yeah.
And so the towers themselves don't include that space. So it's kind of misleading to me in terms of the actual size of the property where those towers is. And right now, the egress and ingress is strictly from Bronte Road.
Right. So this is a mixed use. Again, this is for illustrative purposes. So this is a mixed use site. As you stated, the Farm Boy and the Rexall were redeveloped as part of the block. The point is that the whole block has been redeveloped. That area provides a public square as well and public amenities and a more, I guess, vibrant and enhanced retail environment because of that.
But both sites, because they're on Main Street, will have to have retail on the bottom floor.
Right, but the whole mall has been redeveloped, though, not just the residential. The commercial part of the mall has been redeveloped. Parking had been adjusted as well for that, and there's multiple access points.
Perhaps,
okay,
Councillor.
Okay, I'll just leave it at that. But yes, the only thing I want to say is for the actual village, it is just in and out from Bronte Road.
If we all can keep in mind that the point of the meeting is only to identify possible issues for staff to report on in their recommendation report, everybody will have, I think everyone will have an easier time of it. We're really just here to collect people's issues, if I can put it that way.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, councillors. Thank you, Mr. McNeese. Madam Clerk, would you please call the next delegation?
The next delegation is Lindsay Thomas.
Welcome, Ms. Thomas. Council looks forward to learning what your issues are that we can add to the report.
Thank you. May I have my slideshow?
We hear you, and your slides are up too, if these are yours.
Yes, they are. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Burton, town councilors and staff, as well as members of the community. My name is Lindsay Thomas and I live in Bronte Village. Next slide, please. I'm speaking this evening to shed some light on the reality of the 77 East development proposal application. Contrary to what the developer has stated, this proposal is not sensitive to its surroundings and does not knit the residential buildings to the rest of the village. This is neither a gentle nor appropriate transition and will create an unacceptable adverse impact. Next slide, please. It will compromise established connections within the neighborhood and will alienate a vulnerable population group. The one it has already removed was one too many. This proposal is like having a nice garden in the front yard when the backyard is full of weeds. Next slide, please. The developer presentation stated the average distance between Oscar and the proposed building is 30 meters. However, that average was drawn using floors of the proposal, which are above the height of the Oscar building. If the correct dimensions are used, the average is 26 meters. This may not seem significant, but leads one to wonder what else has been minimized in order to pretend the impact of this building will not affect its surroundings. Next slide, please. For instance, the quoted gradual stepped up facades are actually at a 65-degree angle off the horizontal, hardly gradual. Also, the 20% of the site devoted to the open corner is more like 11% when using the actual numbers on the drawings to make the calculations. The 15th story, termed very partial, may not cover its own building, but it's longer than the Lighthouse building. Oakville zoning bylaw states allowable height is measured to the tallest point of the building, which means even the elevator shaft is included. This brings the overall height to 52.8 meters. And just because the 15th story is a partial floor does not mean it does not cast shadows and block views. It is also misleading to emphasize this proposal is only 15 stories when it is taller than the 17-story lighthouse and a full 9 meters taller than the other 15-story buildings nearby. The building will have rooftop vegetation where, quote, surrounding buildings will have a very pleasant roofscape to look down to, which will be green. The landscaped roof on level 2 will, quote, be visible from neighboring buildings and sidewalks. I'm struggling to see how this is possible when the rooftop vegetation will be 47 meters up in the sky. The top floor of the lighthouse is several meters below that, and the adjacent Oscar building is only 24 meters tall. The level 2 vegetation will be on the north side, blocked from view by its own building. The town's shadow study requirements allow analysis to stop 1.5 hours before sunset, and buildings should avoid excessive shadows. Next slide, please. The application concludes it meets the requirements. However, the study for June 21st stops at 6:18 p.m. The sun sets at 9:03 p.m., a full 2 hours and 45 minutes later. Shadows start to cover the neighboring amenity spaces shortly after 3 p.m., and by 5, the deck and pool at the lighthouse, plus the large patio at Oscar, are completely in the shade. Next slide, please. By 6 p.m., the entire lighthouse, deck, and lawn is in shadow. Again, the sun sets at 9:03 p.m. on June 21st, so those spaces are in shadow for a total of just under 6 hours because of the proposed building. Next slide, please. From April to September, the outdoor spaces of adjacent buildings will be shaded from at least 4 p.m. onwards. This means that residents or visitors using the amenities at the end of a normal workday will never see the sunlight there. In the colder months, the proposed building will be shadowing the Oscar building from 1 p.m. onward. The sun sets at 4:45 p.m. Next slide, please. The shadow study conclusion ignores the cumulative shadows from existing buildings. Those original shadows are minimal on their own in comparison to what is added on by this proposal. The proposal's urban design brief tries to say that summer and winter solstices don't count. Next slide, please. The reality is that these are very important dates when outdoor spaces are in high use in the summer and when days are short in the winter. Shadows are not experienced on only 2 or 4 days of the year. Next slide, please. The LOP has many references to preserving character, providing vistas and compatibility with the existing neighborhood, and ensuring privacy of existing residential areas. It also states the new development has to consider existing development in order to reduce adverse impacts on adjacent properties. The proposed development has not considered its neighbors in this established community. It is very easy to portray the building as having minor impact when the concept rendering is viewed from a distance instead of directly at the edge of sight. It is also convenient that the sun always shines in a concept rendering. Next slide, please. At over 50 meters tall, this proposal is more than double the height of the Oscar building, which is home to seniors with reduced mobility averaging 86 years old, 88 of whom have rooms facing west, plus their common rooms. These are seniors who rely on sunlight coming through their windows, the connection to nature, plus the views to the village beyond. These elements are key to actually anyone of any age for mental and emotional health, and everyone requires this basic health. 60 units, almost 80 residents in the Lighthouse, will have half, if not all of their windows, and therefore their view entirely blocked by this proposed building. Next slide, please. Bronte Village is made up of visual connections to water, to sky, to trees, from one end of the village to the other, including all of the residential areas. Everyone living in Bronte Village is integral to the knit fabric of the community. If some are left out, or even worse, cut out, the knitting will fail. And while the proposal contains a small public space, pretending that the building will not be the dividing wall that it is, it neglects to consider the colder weather, and as everyone who lives here knows, the wind tunnels. The winter is long, and residents who are mainly seniors stay inside and rely on their windows connection to the village. Next slide, please. Many people with dementia and other health concerns spend a lot of time looking out of the window. It's a lifeline. Trees and views of community are not static. They provide stimulation and passive interaction. They change with the seasons. They provide a multi-sensory experience. They connect the viewer to a sense of time, weather, and other living things. Access to natural light is essential to regulate the circadian rhythm, which in turn improves mental and physical health. A wall does none of these things. Next slide, please. Many of Bronte's residents have lived here for most of their lives. The main factor is that longevity is the ability and ease of aging in place. Included in that is the ability to maintain optimum mental health. Elements that support health and well-being for any demographic are green space, access to nature through views, a sense of security, and a feeling of inclusion. The LOP calls it social well-being in the very first paragraph of the mission statement. Next slide, please. A person is more likely to venture into a community if they feel a part of it. If they cannot see out of their window into that community, they are less likely to feel safe to explore. This uncertainty increases if the person is at all physically or mentally compromised. Reducing good mental and physical health can ultimately compromise the vibrancy and diversity of the neighborhood. Depression is a leading cause of disability worldwide. Poor mental and physical health are intertwined. It can be a vicious cycle. No matter which started first, it can lead to less interaction in the community, which means fewer trips to the shops and restaurants, less time, money, and contributions spent anywhere. That is why an investment in mental health is paramount to achieve a community which is thriving and sustainable. The LOP calls it sustainable community design. Next slide, please. It's not a new concept. We have excellent examples right here with the tower in the park concept of every building in the area, some almost 50 years old, sorry. Just look around. The designers of these properties each were conscientious and prioritized mental health, and the established sunlit gardens of each property are shared visually between the neighbors. This invites more social interaction. Some have said that what makes a great piece of music is the space between the notes. Bronte is a great balanced neighborhood because of its space between built form. This is not Toronto. Everyone wants to be able to take a breath and have calm from the pressures of society nowadays. Next slide, please. We have that here in Bronte. And the great thing is that Bronte is still also vibrant, like the LOP desires. Bronte is unique, and because of all that, Bronte is already a destination. When they say build it and they shall come, it doesn't necessarily mean to fill every square inch with concrete and steel. Let us not forget that it is the people and the connections to nature and each other who make Bronte Village, not the buildings. Isn't it time to actually follow through with what is being said should be done with policies and focus on maintaining and improving good mental health? To finish with a quote, there is more to life than increasing its speed. I would also add to that and say there is more to life than increasing its greed. The future depends on what we do in the present. This is a permanent decision that could very well cause a lot of damage to the very community it is claiming to enhance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Thomas, for your information. Questions? Madam Clerk, would you please call the next delegation?
The next delegation is Donovan Cox.
Welcome, Mr. Cox. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you, Your Worship. Can you hear me okay?
We hear you loud and clear. We're looking forward to what you have to say.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship, Town Council and staff and members of the community. My name is Donovan Cox. As a longtime resident of Bronte, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to delegate this evening. Tonight, I wish to express concerns on the magnitude of the proposed 77 East Street development and its impact on the community. Specifically, can the character of a village community be maintained here on the one hand, while meeting the province's intensification mandate on the other? Where is the middle ground? I'd like to consider this question with reference to the transport impact assessment produced by Next Trans Consulting Engineers. Podium commissioned NextTrans to conduct the study to substantiate its 77 East Street proposal. But first, a little bit about context. The designated growth area, according to the Livable Oakville plan, is Bronte Village. Now, Bronte Village is 8 small streets only, nested within Bronte. Its population is just over 3,500, living in about 1,300 residential dwelling units. The NextTrans study indicates that the 77 East Street, along with all active developments in the study area, will add an additional 1,055 residential dwelling units. This should accommodate over 2,200 new residents. And this does not take into consideration the longer-term development that will occur. So the intensification effort is pointing to a doubling of the number of residential units in Bronte Village in the near term. So what's its impact on the village character? Section 24.2.1 of the Livable Oakville plan stipulates that a key objective of the town should be to nurture, conserve, and enhance the historic lakeside village character of Bronte Village by promoting a predominantly low-rise and pedestrian-oriented built form along Lakeshore Road West, Bronte Road, and Jones Street, and providing a sensitive transition between the concentrations, mix and massing of uses and buildings within and adjacent to the village. The 14-story monolithic build at the former Bronte Village Mall does not come close to meeting this criteria. Yet it seems to have introduced a development precedent into our neighborhood. It appears that Podium is attempting to springboard off that precedent to justify its colossal 15-story proposal. That development alone will account for over 10% of the village's near-term intensification. I understand that the Bronte Village Growth Area Review desires intensification at Gateway location, but 15 stories dwarfs both adjacent buildings, the Lighthouse condominium and Oscar. This is hardly a sensitive transition. This kind of large development was really meant for Oakville's northern designated growth areas and not for lakeside Bronte Village. Modest gains from full bonusing will come at a significant loss to existing residents. The low rise and sensitive transition criteria in the Livable Oakville plan will not be met. Impact on environment. The BIA website reminds us that Bronte Village is a 15-minute drive from anywhere in Oakville. Driving is an important benefit to village residents and villagers alike. On a busy schedule, especially in colder months, most residents will rely on their vehicles to access many of the amenities that Oakville has to offer that are simply not available in Bronte Village. The NextTrans study attempts to model an intensified Bronte Village after big cities where driverless communities are feasible. That modeling is not applicable to Bronte's small village community. But also, Uber or taxi options still rely on fossil fuels, and electrical generation for electrical vehicles still rely on fossil fuel. I worked for 10 years in the renewable energy sector, conducting mass energy balance analyses across alternative renewable energy regimes. Alignment with the Council's climate emergency policies is very important to all Oakville residents, but techniques and systems explored often do not translate into desired results in a timely fashion. Impact on parking. The NextTrans study argues that 20% less available parking at 77 East Street is good for Bronte Village. NextTrans justify its claim subjectively by couching it in an environmental improvement strategy. But residents' anger over inadequate parking and predatory towing dominated the election campaign in 2018. COVID has reduced this concern, but only temporarily. Town Council did take positive steps to mitigate those concerns, and the BIA has posted how residents and visitors can find a parking spot. but parking meters had to be implemented, which took away from the village character of the neighborhood. And the few hundred spots that are available have regularly been overwhelmed, even at times during the COVID period when driving was much reduced. The Next Trans study clearly stated that Podium's development proposal presented a technical shortfall in available parking spaces. Oakville zoning bylaw requires 342 parking spaces. Podium's proposing 273 only. Now that's a shortfall of 69 spaces. That is a third of the free public parking spaces that are available at the waterfront. Bronte Village is Oakville's waterfront tourist destination. As Oakville's population intensifies and the number of visitors increase, parking resources will again be overwhelmed. Lack of available parking will cause 77 East Street residents and visitors alike to use neighboring lots. Store owners will get angered, and the result will be an increase in predatory towing and the crowding of side streets. The onus to supply and pay for adequate underground parking should be on the developer and not on the residents, particularly as we head into inflationary times. Podium should not be allowed to build if adequate parking is not provided. Impact on traffic. Traffic studies have not been conducted in Bronte Village in recent years due to COVID. Therefore, the Next Trans study relied on old data generated 5 years ago. The study attempted to normalize that data to predict a 5-year horizon by increasing old data by 1% per year. This growth trajectory significantly underestimates the intensity that will occur in Bronte Village. Arterial roads, Bronte Road, Third Line, Lakeshore Road West, were clogged during rush hour periods before COVID. It was not uncommon for drivers to take 30 to 45 minutes just to drive from Spears Road to their homes in Bronte Village. The Next Trans study did not measure traffic congestion on weekends and after hours during warm months when visitors teem into Bronte Village to visit its waterfront and eat at one of its many restaurants. If Podium's 15-story proposal is allowed, a similar development will occur across East Street. Accordingly, the Gateway location at Lakeshore Road and East Street will be permanently congested. This will additionally cause ongoing safety challenges for many of the seniors living in the area. Reducing the proposed 15 stories at least by half will set a precedent for the prospective neighboring development, will significantly reduce traffic congestion, and will improve pedestrian safety at the Gateway location. This is more suitable for a village. Look, we're in an era where mandated intensification is threatening the character of our village community. The 15-story East Street proposal does not meet a suitable balance between intensification and village community character, and should therefore be rejected as submitted. I am merely advocating tonight that we reasonably uphold the integrity of our existing community bylaws and livable Oakville plan policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cox, for your information. Madam Clerk, would you call the next delegation?
The next delegation is Shelly Thornborough, President of the Bronte Village Residents Association.
Welcome, Ms. Thornborough. Council looks forward to your information.
Good evening, Mayor, Your Worship, and members of council, town staff, the development applicants, delegates, and members of the community. The Bronte Village Residents Association welcomes the opportunity to delegate tonight before council concerning the 77 East Street development application for a mixed-use building, 15 stories, 50.5 meters in height, 245 residential units, 273 parking spaces, and a hardscaped open square to replace 28 mature trees. We acknowledge the efforts of Podium Development to engage the community with 2 public information meetings and additional meetings with the Bronte Village Residents Association and Bronte BIA. As a board, we have come to our opinion regarding this application after extensive analysis of the development application and engagement in the community, which included several virtual community meetings, virtual town halls, coffee drop-in, meetings with council and town planning staff to understand policies and applications. Further engagement by the community led to the BVRA forming a coalition with several members across Bronte to form the 77 East Street Working Group to collectively examine, analyze, and delegate before this application. And many of these members have come before me. We have looked at this application and the possible negative community impacts with the context of lag in the infrastructure development. And we asked members of council to promote balanced growth and uphold the livable Oakville plan and zoning bylaws. While the site is eligible for bonusing, it is not a right. And bonusing needs to be appropriate for the site, for the vision of Bronte Village, and the safety of the community. We recommend that council reject the bonusing proposal as outlined. Next slide, please. We can see from the numerous issues and concerns and considerations between the various stakeholders within the community that this application needs to be reviewed holistically in the context of growth for Bronte Village as one of the 6 growth areas. We, as an association, participated in the Bronte Village Growth Area Review, the regional review, and the provincial review, and want to remind council that this is not just about one application. It's about our neighborhood, the character of Bronte Village, and the well-being of our community. We support growth that is balanced, reasonable, and safe for our community. Next slide, please. Let's dive into the Livable Oakville Plan and zoning bylaws. This application does not conform to the density intensification contemplated for Main Street of Bronte Village area. It doesn't conform to the MU1 zoning and Main Street 2 designation of the Livable Oakville Plan with the number of stories, height, and parking. Next slide, please. If we look deeper, this application seeks special zoning provision with bonusing in excess of MU4, urban core zoning that is attributed to urban centers. I'd like to call out key metrics within the zoning analysis on the slide before you for council and staff to review and impress upon the developer how the proposed variances allowances are justified. The variances range from in regard to the parent zoning to Main Street designation from 237 to 150% in excess of what is currently allowed, 20% less parking allowance, and 67% less minimum and rear yard allowance. I want to point out that when the site designations were set after the conclusion of the Bronte Village area review, additional growth was not contemplated at the time at 220 Marine Drive, the former Cudmore lands, and the Bronte Go major transit station area. Next slide, please. An examination of the density and intensification to the tune of 32% over the allotment would see compression in one of the smaller growth area. Why do developers view the Livable Oakville Plan and zoning bylaws as a starting point? Bonusing is not an as of right for developers. We have 2 examples of development that respects policies and the extensive planning process in Oakville that have reflected community engagement and council approval. The JM Lakeshore Bronte Inc. at 2432 Lakeshore Road West and Amica 2 Lakeshore Road West. Next slide, please. The developers drawn comparison to the former Bronte Village Mall and the existing tall buildings in Bronte. And you will notice that while some stories might be in excess of 15, The height of the vast majority are less than 50.5 meters in height. The existing tall buildings are also set on a tower in the park design, which allows for open and green space, airflow, mitigation of shadowing, and less intensive land utilization. Next slide, please. I will not expound in detail on the community concerns, as various community members have gone before me. While I do appreciate that development applications are primarily decided upon policies, let's not forget what land use and urban planning and planned growth targets are specifically designed to address. The why we are all here, why we engage in municipal planning, why we've been attracted to Bronte, why we've been attracted to Oakville as the #1 livable city, town in Canada. In the last 2 months, Bronte has seen 2 incidents that involve serious injuries to a cyclist and a pedestrian. I personally witnessed a young man struck by a car along Bronte Road and left at the scene by a hit-and-run driver, with heart-wrenching effects of shock and concussion. When we talk about community safety, traffic concerns, lack of parking, access, lack of sightlines, these are not theoretical concepts. These are real statistics that involve our community members who are potentially subject to being injured, maimed, or even killed. Next slide, please. If this application goes forward, there are 3 pillars for council to consider. The livable Oakville plan and the non-conformance, which ultimately renders our policy making ineffective and ignoring the community input into the future and the vision of Bronte Village. The character of Bronte Village, gateways are not defined by tall buildings. The impact to street and pedestrian connections, and the impact to views and surrounding area connections. And then finally, the precedent that it sets. This sets a dangerous precedent for Bronte Village, establishing a corridor of tall buildings along our main street, limiting pedestrian connections. And this is not planned growth that is reflected and respected in our policies. Next slide, please. If we look at this slide, I would like us to stop and reflect and ask, how does this mixed-use building define a gateway for Bronte Village? We've defined that already, and we've reflected that in the flags and the signage that we have on the site. How does the bonusing, which should not be considered an as of right for developers, appropriate for the site and the vision of Bronte when considering the numerous community benefits already reflected in the area? Why is the livable Lawful plan and zoning bylaws not respected and reflected in these applications? I implore council to look at this application based on its merits and the community input and reject this development and seek to promote balanced growth for Bronte Village area. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thornberry, for your information. Councilor O'Meara, you have a question?
Well, thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I have a few questions just based upon what I heard there, and I thank Ms. Thornberry for her comments on behalf of the BVRA. The last statement she just said is, she said, we've defined a gateway already. I'm wondering what that definition is and where who's defined that gateway already. I'm just wondering if she can elaborate a little bit more on that comment that we've defined a gateway already.
Thank you, Councilor O'Meara. We've defined the gateways, and these have been noted by the previous speakers, particularly Jonathan McNeese, but in the Bronte Village area review, it was outlined that we have two major gateways as set at the corner of Bronte Road and Lakeshore Road West, and East Street and Lakeshore Road West. And these have been defined towards the east by the flags and and the art form that we have listed on the street.
Okay, so what's existing is the current gateway and no new gateways need to be added? Is that what I'm to understand then?
I don't think I'm reflecting that no gateways need to be added, Councillor Mira. I'm simply pointing out that we have defined our gateways that already today, and they are not specifically defined by tall buildings.
Councillor
No,
and Councillor, could we, in the spirit of what the meeting's for, could we agree that one of the issues we want staff to put on the list is is this an appropriate gateway? I mean, isn't that the planning issue to be identified here rather than to debate it? It's really, this isn't a debating night.
No, I'm with you, Worship. I'm just wondering what we've already agreed on or what we need to figure out. So I'm trying to define.
Well, no matter no matter what a delegation may say, staff are going to go away and bring us back a report that says what things are and what they recommend. And I don't think there's a need to try to figure out who's right about what tonight. It's just a matter of collecting issues.
Your Worship, I'm wondering whether I need to add things to the list at the end. So I'm just trying to get clarification over that. But if you'd like to expedite the fact that I need further clarification rather than asking the delegate, I'm happy to do that. So I'm happy to yield the floor, Your Worship, until it's time to speak to staff then. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your consideration. Thank you, Ms. Thornberry, for your information. Madam Clerk, would you call the next delegation?
The next delegation is Brian Hassett.
Good evening, sir. Council looks forward to your information, especially if you're adding issues to our list. If you haven't already, please unmute yourself so that we can hear you.
Hello?
Hello, we can hear you.
Oh, my goodness, that took a while. Can you, oh, it looks like you can see me. Okay. Hey, everybody. Well, speaking to this gateway thing, this is a masterpiece opportunity gateway thing. This is exactly sort of what we're going for is a gateway is as I said before, like the pillars of Hercules. Like you want something standing there to designate you are now going to somewhere else. And flower pots on the lampposts aren't going to do that. And now we've got this opportunity of these people, this incredible architecture consortium that has designed a masterpiece of an architecture to be that very gateway. And that's exactly what a gateway is. It's not flower pots on a lamppost. It's hello, you're here. And this building is a hello, you're here. And one other thing I was saying, premise that it's, you know, gonna be bad for architecture in Bronte Village. To the exact contrary, not only is this building beautiful, it's going to make the other buildings that are coming in Bronte Village more beautiful. This building will make other buildings more beautiful, just as plants will seed and procreate other plants. You guys know well, as do most, that there's all sorts of sort of planning things that are buildings, that is to say, coming in along Lakeshore West. And if there's a building of this world-renowned architecture firm designing a building that, incidentally, if people don't know, is the very same architect who did the shores, So there's going to be a continuity. People talk about, oh, keeping Bronte Village architecture the same or something. It's like, well, what architecture in Bronte Village do you want to see replicated? And the Shores is that. And so there's going to be this undulating, flowing building. And the setback is important, in my opinion. That it's not just this big cement square block like the thing next to it. This is beautiful architecture. And just to the step back issue, it's going to step back towards the village, towards the lower rise buildings that exist now and may exist in the future. So it's sort of flowing, just as the waterfall sculpture they've put in above the living wall. It's flowing into Oakville, or into Bronte, sorry. So those are both important things, and also the environmental nature of, and also the world renownedness of these architectures. I greatly assume all of town council have done their due diligence on these guys, IDI, I think they're called, but they've built, well, first of all, buildings, masterpiece buildings in like London, Paris, Tel Aviv, Glasgow, Boston, New York, LA, Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa, and they're Canadian based, and they're one of the world renowned architects. And so in my opinion and feeling, one of the world's great architects, almost a Frank Gehry type, are sort of stepping up and saying, hey, we could put a masterpiece here. And, is Florence going to turn down Michelangelo? Like, we've got this opportunity here of something that's, it kind of blows my mind that these world-renowned architects who do brilliant stuff, are wanting to come to Little Bronte Village. Also, this point about people, I doubt they're going to, adhere to all these environmental things they're saying. Look into their other buildings. Look into the things they've done around the world. These guys are environmental pioneers in terms of planning and development and architecture. And this building, and so they have a whole history of this. I mean, going back decades, and they're very futuristic looking, and are aware of being carbon neutral, and they're putting in a green roof. They're going to be recycling gray water, which is huge. They're going to hopefully be able to, use a geothermal. They are building beyond the building requirements of for glass depth and wall depth, and they are, again, if you look into who these guys are and what they've done for decades, are environmental pioneers in the building process. So that needs to be taken into account. And also, I just want to say about this residents association thing, man. I've been here my family's been here 30 years. What if somebody went around and said, if I decided to be the Oakville Town Council Residents Association, and then I went around saying a bunch of stuff with your name on it? Well, but you wouldn't like that. And I don't love that this thing that calls itself the Residents Association, it doesn't represent this resident. It doesn't represent my next door neighbor, my back door neighbors, who are all for this project. And I've been walking around the last few months since this thing's been, in the air, and talking to my neighbors, and I haven't talked to a single one who is opposed to this project. All along Marine Drive here and up around Lakeshore and so on, people love it. And so when somebody puts this, they are the Residents Association, they don't really represent any resident I know. So there's that. And then I talked to the small business owners that I patronize here, which I think this will all help. And the tax revenue that's going to come in from this is insane. But like Jim at the Music Box, Tom at the Planted Aquaria, Cam and Caitlin at Squisha House, they love this building. It's modern, it's new, it's bringing people in. Maybe some of you love the Harborside restaurant there. Wilma and Frank are all into it, and Heather at my girlfriend's closet, and Tan at Eco Philosophy who loves it especially because of all the environmental stuff. Oh, the one guy, give him credit, Ingo at European Time, the watch guy. Love that guy. I think he's got the most villagey shop in all of the village. But he was the one guy I talked to who was not for it because his building's getting torn down for the thing that's coming in there. But every other shop owner that I've talked to around here and every neighbor I've talked to around here is all for this thing. So I really think that needs to be stressed. Just get back to the original plan. You've got the livable Oakville plan and the regional plan and the provincial plan. You know, part of it says, got this here somewhere, new development is in designated growth areas should occur adjacent to the existing built up area. And that is definitional about what's going on here. They're putting in a building that's exactly the same height as the building right next to it. Like how more clear could you possibly be? It's going to be the exact same height. So it's not infringing on anything. So there's that. Oh, and just a quick little kind of funny historical perspective. When the Eiffel Tower was being built in Paris, there was some people who protested against it. And they, believe it or not, they even printed pamphlets. And they were wrong, right? It's the definition of the city. When the Hollywood sign was put up in Los Angeles, a few people complained about that, and it was a private and government initiative that kept that became the symbol of the city. And here in Bronte Village, the waterfront park was opposed by people. It might be even some of the same ones that are opposing this. And that's the definition of Bronte Village. So, you know, I hope you guys have the courage of that this building is beautiful, and you know that it's going to be great for Oakville. So I hope you have the courage to vote for it and, make Bronte Village better, because that's what this building's going to do. No question about it.
Thank you, Mr. Hassett, for your information. And as I've said to others, we're not voting on anything tonight, but we're waiting for staff's recommendation and hopefully the public meeting that will give everybody a chance to treat tonight as a rehearsal, I guess, for that evening when we can have these discussions again, perhaps. Madam Clerk, are there any other delegations?
Our last listed delegation is Eldon Theodore from MHBC.
Mr. Theodore, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the committee. I'll actually be doing a presentation with Christian Huggett tonight. And we do have a presentation that's just been posted. I know Christian's been unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So Eldon and I are going to share this presentation. I'm Christian Huggett. I'm the development developer, VP of developments from Podium. I want to thank all those people
Mr. Theodore, we seem to have lost the sound of your partner.
I'm here. I'm sorry. It added me a link to say, do you want to be a panelist? Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Can we start again? I'm sorry. This is sort of out of order.
Sure.
Apologize. Okay. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, your worship, councillors, neighbors, stakeholders. I'm here with Eldon, of course, and I am representing Podium. I'm the VP of Development. We have watched with interest and taking copious notes, my colleague Nick and myself, of all the people who spoke. We are here to present the proposal for 77 East. Many of you seem to know it quite intimately. We appreciate the efforts and energy of all those with concerns and those with energy to support it as well. So we know that there are both camps here. I note in particular BVRA. I think I noted about five of the deputants were from the BVRA. So clearly they are invested. Next slide, please. In terms of our approach for considerations of what we thought would make a successful project are are on the screen, sorry, and we'll go through those. One was hiring a great team. One was looking at the context and transition, looking at high quality architecture, sustainable design, resident wellness, community engagement, community benefits, and ultimately trying to provide a positive contribution to Bronte Village and Oakville in general. We'll go through these elements through our presentation. Next slide, please. So our team at Podium is based in Toronto, but we have many projects underway throughout Southern Ontario. We specialize in urban infill projects, mid and higher rise buildings that are mixed use, combining residential and commercial uses. And we are a team of designers, engineers, and planners who come together to help build real projects. What's most interesting is we are aligned as developers, constructors, and asset managers, meaning we have long-term interests in any projects we execute. We have assembled a great team. We believe they're shown here in terms of our consultant team on the right, including Eldon and MHBC, who's with me today. Next slide, please. For some context on how we became involved, the site's in the foreground with a red dashed line around it, but originally was 2 of the 3 lots that are before you as part of the application. It was a former development site, some of you may recall, by another developer. We saw this site as terrific proximity, of course, to Bronte Village, including the marina, local parks, local commercial. We've been really interested in this idea of a 20-minute neighborhood. And as I mentioned, we are exclusively focused on urban infill projects in our pipeline. And so the ability to walk out your front door with proximity to retail, restaurants, groceries, and amenity and recreation was very attractive to us. And that was why this site was a high priority for us. As part of our underwriting, we reviewed the previous history and planning applications. I myself was a former planner, urban designer, and carefully looked at all of the emerging policy as well as existing policy. We understood the challenges and concerns raised during the process the previous developer went through, as well as the future context that's being laid out before you today. Next slide, please. I'll turn it over to Eldon now.
Thanks, Christian. So one of the things that stood out about this site to us is its unique location at the edge of an existing tall building neighborhood to the east and the south, and at the edge of a lower Main Street buildings along Lakeshore Road. So really this offered an opportunity to explore a built form that bridged those 2 characters to achieve compatibility with existing tall buildings while also stepping down to meet the Main Street character. Next slide. And as mentioned by Rob in his presentation earlier on tonight, the site is located within the town's growth area, where a majority of growth is intended to be focused. In the Liverpool plan, it permits mixed-use buildings up to 6 stories with the potential for 10 for bonusing, and it's located at a gateway where additional height and density is directed. Next slide. As Christian mentioned, there were two previous applications for the 83 East Street and the 2266 Lakeshore Road West properties that were submitted in 2015 and 2017, respectively, looking at 20 stories and 15 stories, respectively, on those sites. Both previous development applications were only for the two properties. The easternmost parcel, which was 2262 Lakeshore, was not included in those proposals, resulting in a parcel of land being orphaned, but still being within a gateway location within Bronte Village. So the size of the site and the design ran into many issues in terms of ability to provide transition to the neighboring lots. So this proposal includes 2262 Lakeshore, which allows for a larger 3-parcel development, which is more efficient in the use of land. The larger site also allows for greater ability to accommodate transition to those neighboring streets and properties. And we had met with Oakville Town staff twice prior to making our application, and those meetings really helped us to shape the application that we submitted. Next slide. So we know that the Bronte Village originally went through a growth area review in the Liverpool Oakville plan in 2018. However, we want to recognize that since that review, the provincial policy statement has changed once, the growth plan has changed twice, including growth projections extending from 2041 to 2051, and recognizing the town has declared a climate emergency. So I think the region has also undertaken a review to distribute these growth projections locally, which we anticipate would be focused within growth areas within the town in order to protect for existing stable residential neighborhoods. The point we really want to highlight is that planning is not static. It is always evolving and changing to those changing objectives, as shown in this chart here. And therefore, it is appropriate to continually revisit that framework as applications come forward. Next slide. And in preparing so many applications, we took great effort to ensure the proposal meets the policy direction of Bronte Village and Liverpool Oakville plan, as I've illustrated here in this slide. The only area where we seek relief is increased height, where we believe it's appropriate because we proposed a building that it complements existing tall buildings to the east and south and steps down towards Lakeshore Road and offers public amenity and contributions that will complement the Main Street character, the vibrancy, and create a place to draw people into Bronte Village. I'm just going to turn it back to Christian, who's going to complete the rest of the presentation.
Sorry, next slide, please. The attached is a site plan which shows the key outlines of the building, showing the terracing as it steps down and away from the corner of East and Lakeshore. The portion in red is what we're calling a publicly accessible, privately owned open space called a POPS, which is approximately 20% of the land area. And that is one of the key drivers of consideration of additional height. We looked at the idea of gateway and reversed it to say that instead of denoting it with height at the corner, we have reversed it to say, let's celebrate the community in a public space. And so those considerations of additional height are pulled away back towards the taller buildings that we've heard so much about in the shoulders. The building is primarily 14 stories. The two portions that are in tan are the two areas that are above at 15 stories, and those include mechanical and amenity. Normally, if it's mechanical, you wouldn't count that as a story, but because there is indoor amenity, it is counted. Our stats, we understand as well that our building is within 8 inches of the rooftop height of the adjacent building to the south, the Lighthouse. So our 14th story is the same as their 17th story, and then they have mechanical above. So we understand that we're very close in height. Next slide, please. So you have the overall image. You've seen this a lot, and I've talked about this stepping down to the corner. The building's articulated with glass and balconies to show elegant ribbons that articulate the building. An idea of greening the building both from the corner, the community pops up through the livable wall to a interior courtyard, up right up through the building and the balconies themselves. Next slide, please.
Long.
Pardon? So in terms of sustainable development, and I apologize, I think we're out of time, so I would ask if we could have a few minute extension.
Well, Mr. Huggett, let me counter that. The purpose of tonight is not to receive your pitch for your project. The purpose of tonight is to identify what issues staff are going to be evaluating your project on. You would spend your time more profitably if you identified issues that you wanted staff to consider in evaluating your project. And I believe in the interests of having a successful engagement tonight on that mission, that if that's what you would apply yourself to, I could give you a few more minutes. But if that's not what you're about, I'm inclined to hold you to your time limit. How would you like to proceed?
I'm just trying to understand your point. Do you want me to try to respond to the issues that were brought up, or would you like me to continue to explain why we have put forward an application as we have?
It's my view that your most appropriate use of your time is to identify the issues on which you would like to be evaluated. So, for example, as Mr. Theodore just said, you've decided to depart from our OP's advice on bonusing, for example, and height. Is there a way you'd like that issue considered when the staff evaluate your project? Another thing, anyway, I don't want to do it for you, but Mr. Theodore knows us well and has dealt with us many times. It could be that he'd make a better use of the time. But I'm in your hands. We've certainly appreciated the information that you squeezed into your 10 minutes. Mr. Theodore, how do you two want to proceed?
So to you, Mr. Mayor, and just part of the presentation was just to provide a bit of context. We do have a number of slides where we acknowledge issues that have been raised. Perhaps if you can extend some time for us to be able to speak to those issues, because we would want those as well for staff to consider as part of their evaluation.
Thank you for accepting my offer. We're all ears.
So Christian, perhaps if we could fast forward to those two slides, which focus on both the issues that were raised as well as comments that were received positively to our application.
Sure. If through the clerk, if you could advance to slide 15, please. So I think Mr. Theodore explained the change that we are seeking from the livable plan, which is about height, and we believe we meet the other objectives. However, these are some of the concerns that were raised through our 2 public information meetings, as well as our consultation with BVRA, city staff, and the BIA. So there has been concern about height. We believe because of the location and that it's a very site-specific nature, that it is justified for this unique site, and partly because we are giving up 20% of the site. We are suggesting that terracing is suitable as shown. More on-site parking being desired. We have conducted a full traffic study, as was commented by several people, about that parking study we believe is being appropriate, and a 20% reduction. And traffic impacts as well were discussed in that study. Shadow view impacts on adjacent buildings. There was some comments about that. We have done a shadow study, completed it, and reviewed those through an urban design review. Construction impacts, there's been a lot of commentary about that tonight, as well as in our meetings. We have suggested that those will be addressed through site plan and building permit. We are certainly open to a collaborative process on answering those those questions. We have a construction team in-house, so we have the ability to get to some of those questions probably earlier than others. So we are open to those questions. Maintaining the livable Oakville plan, as I mentioned, other than height, we believe it meets the intent. And then changing the character of Bronte, we think that it will and is changing already. It is in a growth plan and growth area. So it is undergoing change, and we believe we are adding to that. If you could advance to one more slide, then I can conclude. We have heard a lot of positive comments as well, and I'm glad to hear there was some positive here. So we have heard the ones before you about architecture, gateway, environmental sustainable design. I have a slide about that. We are very actively promoting a low carbon building here, fit well, supportive occupant wellness, and well exceeding building code requirements. We are looking at trying to make this as the standard, the new standard for development in Oakville. Project we think will be an asset and support local business and develop an important corner. I think we could end on the last slide, the next slide, sorry, which is an idea about that community benefit, which is this pop space. We've shown that, as I suggested, we can outfit this, we can include public art. We see this as a place potentially for event planning and passive recreation. And we think it itself acts as a gateway as part of that. So I'll turn it back knowing that I'm over time, and thank you for the indulgence.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Mayor.
you very much for the information. Mr. Theodore, do you have final comments?
I just wanted to thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank staff for their presentation as well. And thank you to the residents who came out to provide their comments and feedback.
Thank you, sir. Now, if you would entertain a few questions, Councillor Elgar and Councillor O'Meara have developed something for you. Councillor Elgar, would you like to go first?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Burton. Thanks for your presentation. Perhaps you can help me out with regard to the parking. You have 245 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments proposed in this building. You have 28 parking spaces for commercial use. When I calculate that, that means every visitor that comes to visit them has to either walk or bring their bicycle. And because there are no visitor parking spaces, is that correct?
We can deflect to our traffic consultant, I believe, is here. I hope he was available. If he's not, I can try to answer that. But our traffic consultant, Richard from Nextrans.
Yep, I'm still here. Am I unmuted?
Great. You are.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, listening to the comments and the questions posed through all the delegates, parking, I don't want to get into a long-winded description or analysis, but the trending lead on parking demand these days, especially for more higher density and rental density apartments, is on the low side. We've put in a fairly robust justification in our work, and this is not the only site, obviously, where I'm looking at parking. Pretty much every application I work on in the GTA has a request for parking reduction. So, this is all substantiated through data that we collect in the field, and as that's also peer reviewed by city and town and municipal staff at all the various municipalities. And there's definitely a trend in reduced parking standards. And this is done for a number of reasons. One is simply just to reduce the auto dependency on people. If you build parking, as someone said earlier, they will come. So if we manage parking, it clearly leads us down a path where we can hopefully reduce single occupant trips and makes our TDM measures, our transportation demand management measures, far more palatable for people to start to take and apply. So knowing that, the way we rationalize parking for this site is generally a blended ratio of 1 space per unit. And that doesn't mean every unit gets 1 space. it means that's the blended ratio on how it works out. Some of the larger units may get more spaces if the demand is there. Some of the smaller units, and some of the bachelors or one bedrooms may not even get parking available to them. And that's definitely what we're seeing trending now in the marketplace. We know we're in a housing crisis and an affordability crisis. Parking is not cheap. Underground parking runs around $100,000 per space. So that's a good chunk of a mortgage that can be put into your investment rather than parking. So we are seeing some of the smaller units not even have parking available to them. Given the mixed use nature of this area, I do believe that's a very sound argument. Bike lanes, transit, sidewalks, all the amenities within close proximity yields itself to that sort of justification. In terms of the commercial, we're not providing zero parking. What we're suggesting is that parking between the retail, which we feel would be more walkable. There will be some car, maybe some of the merchants will require, but generally the retail, ground floor retail is more of a walkable scale of parking demand. You don't need shopping center rates in a mixed use building at all. We've done surveys over the years and we found parking rates for those types of uses is minimal at best. So what we're recommending is a shared arrangement where the visitor to the residents as well as the commercial patrons share the parking. And I believe that ratio is around 20, 25 or 26 spaces.
And you show 28.
Okay, thank you, 28. So
what
that's the
now-
rationale behind the parking. I'm not sure if there's further questions.
Vehicle charging stations, are they included in your parking numbers? Are they parking spaces or what are they? 'Cause
Yeah,
you
they're
mentioned
counted
that
towards the
also.
overall supply.
So they're part of the 273.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, got it. Okay, I thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Elgar. Councillor O'Meara and then Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Your Worship. One question is to follow up on that, and then more of a general question after that is, we've heard a lot tonight about, well, why don't you have enough parking? And then we've also heard, what about the traffic? And why is there so much traffic, or what are we going to have for traffic? And can you maybe speak a little bit about, increased parking, increased traffic, or traffic and parking relationships? I'm not sure I understand that dynamic with your proposal.
Is that back to me, Richard Pernicki?
Sure, Richard, go ahead.
Richard, that's back to you.
Okay, I assume so. Thank you, Councillor. Well, and this is something I hear at every public meeting and community meeting I attend is, there's too much traffic, not enough parking. But it's a symbiotic relationship. If you really think about it in a little more detail, and like I said earlier, if you build it, they will come. So if you build more parking, people will start to own more cars and start to use cars. So the whole idea, what we're trying to manage in today's world is TDM measures and transportation demand management. And that's to get people out of their cars and on other modes of travel. And one of the key measures of being able to do that is by reduced parking standards. So hopefully we achieve these, the policies that are written in the town's OP and regional OPs for reduced auto dependency. So the best way to do that is by reduced parking standards. We're not talking about reducing them to zero or anything completely unreasonable. But I think what we're seeing in the outskirts of the GTA and some of the suburban towns is a blended ratio around 1 per tenant. And that works well. We've seen that working quite well, where you have one vehicle dependent per unit. And if there's a second vehicle needed, maybe an Uber is required or a car share space is used, that sort of thing, where you make alternative forms of transportation for that second vehicular trip.
Well, I thank you for that. And my last question really will just go to Christian, and it's the theme we've heard tonight is why 15 stories? Why can you not do what you need to do within the envelope that the official plan has asked you to do within 10 stories? Again, 6 stories plus 4, but my question really is, what makes this application say that I need 5 more stories than what our plan has said?
Thank you for the question. And I think I mentioned it, but I'll say it again. We believe that this is a very site-specific response that is contextual. I know one of the presenters with the blue and the green boxes didn't necessarily agree, but that transition and in a shoulder area from tall apartment buildings stepping down to a tall neighborhood, we could fill out the site presumably in 10 stories and done that with a U-shaped building and get similar densities. But what we decided to do instead was to prioritize the gateway designation and step the building away from that. And we carved out a lot of density from that corner to respect the policies. And in our opinion, stepping that up to 14 plus 1, it is 15 stories technically, but semantics aside, we are stepping it up for those extra stories away from the corner in an area which could otherwise be building. And we believe that has been done in an appropriate way. And so that's how we've come to that.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. Councillor Robertson?
Thank you, Christian and Podium, for the presentation. I think one of my biggest pieces is the environmental segment on it in terms of great promises, probably the thing that impressed me the most about the development in the first place. Couple questions in terms of your chargers, which is so forward thinking to say, yes, we are going to equip the parking lot with chargers because every car is going to eventually become an EV. Are your chargers the level 3 chargers then that will equip or do fast charging?
Yeah, I mean, we are building a building currently in Kingston, which has the capacity up to 90% of spots with EV charging, level 2 or level 3. So we see that as the future, and that is partly, Richard is justifying the rates today, but we believe that at the time when this building would come in line in 5-6 years, that parking ratios and usage will look even different then. That's our belief. And one comment I made in the PIM, which I'll echo here, is being a combined developer, constructor, and asset manager, meaning we have a long-term stake in the asset itself. We have to build what we think is rentable long-term. We have to build the right amount of parking, or we're not going to be able to rent out our unit. And we understand full well, we've heard from almost everyone that parking in Bronte at a larger scale is an issue, predatory towing and parking meter problems and things happening. We don't believe that alone is a reason to then say, well, we're going to provide more parking than we need, especially when we're looking to the future. We actually think this can be the pinnacle of the 20-minute neighborhood that is being looked at so closely for Bronte Village, and that people will legitimately have the ability to walk, support local business, and not get in their car and drive all around Oakville or Burlington to go get their everyday needs. And so maybe they have one car, not even full car all the time. So that's, I didn't get into our sustainable slide, and I apologize because I ran out of time, but we have a lot of green efforts that we are looking at. But one of them, I think, is really about intensification, where we believe we shouldn't underdevelop a site, and that is #1 green strategy across the board. And it doesn't mean we throw out all the character and all the policies around what Bronte Village should be or anything should be, but we believe we've assessed that and balanced that, and that is one of the fundamental priorities. And this, we believe, is one of the only sites in Bronte that could accommodate a building of this scale. So that's why we are wearing that hat very carefully as planners and working in other jurisdictions to try to balance that. But we understand all the concerns that have been brought up, and many are legitimate, things that we should be discussing. But we have assessed all of them in our application, in our various reports.
Thank you. In terms of, I like the level 3s, the more level 3s, the better. I think that in terms of parking, it's not the resident parking and your arguments on that so much as, yes, you are going to have mixed retail plus visitors, and there isn't a lot. And Bronte just doesn't have a lot of extra street parking for those people. So that's probably the piece that, you know, in terms of issues for council, will be a key piece.
Thank you, Councillor. I want to thank you, folks from Podium and Eldon and Richard for the time and the information you provided. I was very happy to hear you, Mr. Huggett, say that you have addressed all these things in your application and your studies. And it's always been my view that that's where the information belongs, because as both of you know, as planners, the process is that our staff evaluate what's really in the application, not what might be said at a meeting by way of possible blandishment or encouragement. And so it's a great relief to hear that you're professional enough to have got it all in your application. And that way, council will have the opportunity to get a recommendation from staff that does consider everything. And so thank you very much for your time this evening. Madam Clerk?
Thank you.
Is there
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
delegation?
That is our last delegation.
Thank you very much. Council, that was our last delegation, and it would now be in order for you to offer up any issues that you would like Mr. Charles to add to his list. And I see two hands. Councillor Duddick, have you got something to add to the list?
Yes, thank you, Worship. The concern I have is with the public square and the maintaining of, for lack of a better word, policing behavior. My concern is with the people who may be residing there, hours of use, noise levels. We've all experienced that where we have something abutting residential areas, and the first thing we hear complaints about is, I don't like the music at this hour, and I don't like the kids banging a ball and things of that nature. So if staff can maybe work through that with the applicant, how they see that unfolding, that would be great.
So if I understand you correctly, you'd like to add the issue, is the POP, the proposed POP appropriate? Is that capture it? Councillor O'Meara, Councillor Chisholm hasn't participated yet. Would you like to let him go before you?
Always happy to relent to my Ward 2 councillors because they're not Ward wonderful yet.
All right, well, Councillor Chisholm, it's your turn. What would you like to add to the list?
Well, I don't know what to add. I just want to have reconfirmation, and the comments were made from a lot of the presentations. There's one I really wanted to zero in was the site plan. I think that's going to be a very interesting and challenging, and I'd like to see that come back to council. And I think that was said. I just want to confirm that one. I'd like to have a little bit more clarity and definition on the gateways, of what that means. I think there was some discussion about size and height and so forth, and what constitutes the gateway. We already know about the parking situation, and the other one was the transportation. There was comments that we haven't had any transportation studies in a while, so I just want that to be identified to our planners and so forth with respect to revisiting those in relation to this application. That's it for me, Mr. Worship.
Thank you. So, Councillor Chisholm, your issues are: is the active transportation master plan adequate? Is the transportation master plan adequate? And is this an appropriate gateway? All right. On the matter of site plan, I do pray that we'll all keep in mind that this is not site plan. That's later. And the decision on a zoning bylaw, the decision on an OP amendment are not made with Site plans are not filed in support of those. Site plan is a separate thing that happens after. Councillor Haslett-Deal, I'm going to assume.
Your worship, just to jump in, can I just jump in there just for clarification on that? It was said, and just to have clarification, one of the presentations said it was behind closed doors. We are very transparent when it comes to site plan. If something has to, yes, we've delegated authority in some most instances on site plan to senior staff. However, with respect to something that is a high priority, it can come back to council for discussion and so forth. I just want to have that clarified.
Yes,
thank you.
Absolutely. At the appropriate time, council can pass a resolution calling for the site plan report to come to council. What council cannot do is use site plan to stop something. That's the most important part of the lesson of the site plan section of the Planning Act. Councillor Haslett-Deal, I'm going to assume that Councillor O'Meara's chivalry to Councillor Chisholm will extend to you. So you're next. What issue would you like to add to the list?
So it's there, Mayor Burton, but I don't like that it's tucked in with a whole bunch of things. It references shadowing, and I'm not sure if the town staff will be asking for a peer review of their shadow study, but while I applaud all of the delegates tonight, I really felt that people came out with their best insights and concerns. It would be good to understand if that shadow study does reflect what will happen to their neighboring building. It's important to build this architecturally sympathetic to the neighborhood, and I believe our urban design already does require them to step back. So it is not as if they can have the full footprint. But I am sensitive to what the neighbors have to live with, and that shadow study is key to their enjoyment of their property or their apartment building. So I just ask that it be part of the consideration.
So the issue then, if I can try to assist, is the shadowing acceptable?
Correct. And is the design appropriate, or are there adjustments to the design that could be made that facilitate a better neighborly, work better for the neighborhood? Not just what we see from the street, but from the folks who live beside it.
We don't design projects for people. We have to evaluate the shadowing as submitted, of the design as submitted. So
well, when we look at the footprint of the building and how they're going to do it, urban design should be considering, is the angling of that building, or would it be better served and the shadowing improved if the angle is changed? So
you could
if
wish
shadowing
for
could
you could wish for that.
That'd be great.
Councillor, you could wish for that, but we don't design them. We evaluate the design given. And if we tell them that the design won't work, it's their job to change it, not ours. That's the point I'm chasing here.
Hence why I made my comments. Thanks very much.
Councillor O'Meara, I think your chivalry has extended to everybody who wanted a shot, and you get the final say. Hopefully you have issues to add.
I do. I have a list of issues, and I apologize, but Gabe, please get your pen out. And just so you know, Councillor Robertson and I have worked deleterious on this timeline, so, and on these sort of issues. So if staff could please look at why we may not be able to look at a 120-day timeline and how that relates to approvals, and perhaps what our 120-day timeline looks like with all of our applications, not just on this application. I had a message from Anne, who was not able to make it tonight, but she asked about what kind of affordable housing would be included in this development, and what sort of affordable housing issues were even being considered in this development. The third aspect is, again, the POP, the publicly owned private partnership. Who programs that? And again, we heard a couple comments from my colleagues tonight, but who's in charge of programming that? And who is responsible for that, if we can get clarification on that. One issue, and again, I apologize if this did overlap with some of staff's comments, but I think we really need clarification on, what does zoning say? What does the official plan say? What does the regional plan say? And what their provincial policies say? And how do those influence our decision and the decision that the Ontario Planning Tribunal, how does that all factor in? Because that's a big part of our discussion right now. And I know we've heard a lot to know, well, the zoning says this, but then we heard that our zoning's out of date, and we know the OPPA's in there, but then we know provincial plans have changed. And we also know that we have till 2023 to meet those. So if staff can provide clarification on what policies we're looking at right now and what are our obligations on those, that would be great. Also, if staff can give some guidance on adjacent heights. We've heard, well, this is so tall and nobody else is tall around there. And we know that there are other buildings adjacent and near that are very, very tall. And just wondering how those heights factor into the decision-making abilities of our planning staff. And then I guess I'll just close with the parking element really here. And again, I had mentioned it briefly, but we want a lot of parking. We don't want a lot of traffic. And if staff could do us a favor and look into best practices, best research on, if you add parking, do they come? If you don't want traffic, do you add parking? It'd be great to get some clarification on our parking ratios and our traffic studies and how those things meet at the end of the day, because I think we can kind of speak out of both sides of our mouths on these issues sometimes. So anyway, Your Worship, that was a mouthful, and I appreciate the timeline, and I know Councillor Robertson and I appreciate the efforts there.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. Mr. Charles, are you ready to reveal your list?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you, a lot of input this evening, which is excellent and always very helpful for us. So thank you to council and to the public for that. Quite a bit of input, and a number of the topics are covered throughout the staff report. But in terms of the additional items that had heard for consideration, including the appropriate form of a gateway in this location, and what would that look like? The use of the POPs and operational matters, as well as the programming of the POPs. Look at the adequacy of our ATMP and TMP as it relates to this area. Is the building designed such that it limits shadowing? Timeframe for evaluating this proposal and how it does compare to the other applications that the town currently has in circulation. What type of affordable housing is being considered through the development proposal? Look at a full analysis of the policy context at the provincial, regional, and local level. Investigate adjacent building heights for comparative purposes, and look into best practices for how to handle parking, including ratios compared to transportation planning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Charles. Who wants to move the staff recommendation, which is basically to receive all that plus the added? Councillor Robertson, thank you very much. Is there any objection to Councillor Robertson's motion? Madam Clerk, there's no objection, therefore it carries. Thank you, Council. And that brings us to our next public hearing item, and that's the public meeting and recommendation report for the town-initiated site-specific zoning bylaw amendment at 2175 Cornwall Road. And we have a presentation from Lee Musson, the acting manager of planning in the East District. And if anyone is wishing to comment on this item, they can call 905-815-6095 and we'll connect you to the meeting. You'll be called upon to speak following the registered delegation. And Council, we have a registered delegation speaking on behalf of residents in the area. Ms. Musson, are you ready to go? She is. Well, then you have the floor and we're all ears. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Burton and members of council. This evening, my public meeting report and recommendation report can be found as item 6.2 in your agenda. The item before you this evening is a town-initiated zoning bylaw amendment as directed by council at a special planning development meeting held on January 27th of this year. The purpose of this report is to present bylaw 2021-124, which would make site-specific amendments to the town zoning bylaw as it relates to the property at 2175 Cornwall Road. Next slide, please. Council is very aware of this site and its related history, so I will attempt to be brief. The site is generally located west of Ford Drive and east of Maple Grove Drive between Cornwall Road and an active rail line. It is 12 hectares in size with approximately 600 meters of frontage on Cornwall Road. The lands are subject to a site plan application that was received in January of 2020 to permit modifications to an existing building, expansion of an existing parking lot, and the introduction of a second driveway access from Cornwall Road. The site plan was appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal in November of 2020, and a settlement hearing took place on September 16th. And at this hearing, the Ontario Land Tribunal member issued a verbal decision conditionally approving the site plan. These lands were also subject to a Minister's zoning order and a Parkway Belt West plan. On July 29th and July 30th of this year, the Minister of Municipal Affairs approved the removal of the Minister's zoning order and the Parkway Belt West plan from these lands. The Minister also imposed a new Minister's zoning order, which limited the floor area and number of parking on the site. Next slide, please. The property is currently zoned E2, business employment, and the existing zoning on these lands does not provide a floor area cap, nor a maximum number of parking spaces. Next slide, please. As I indicated earlier, in January of this year, Council passed a resolution that directed staff to bring forward a zoning bylaw amendment for Council's consideration, which would have the effect of capping the floor area on the property and the number of parking spaces in order to restrict any future expansions of the proposed use. Next slide, please. So this evening, I'm presenting bylaw 2021-124 for your consideration, which can be found in Appendix A of my staff report. The purpose of the proposed amendment is to make housekeeping modifications to the town zoning bylaw that would align with the new Minister's zoning order. The bylaw, if approved, would apply additional regulations restricting the maximum floor area to 49,200 meters squared and provide a maximum of 689 parking spaces on the property. Next slide, please. Notice of tonight's meeting was provided in accordance with the Planning Act, and in addition, notice was published within the Oakville Beaver on September 9th. Staff is satisfied that the proposed housekeeping amendment is consistent with the provincial policy statement, conforms to the growth plan and the Halton Regional Official Plan, and conforms to the Liverpool Oakville Plan. To conclude, staff are recommending approval of this town-initiated site-specific zoning bylaw amendment, which would impose further restrictions on the lands municipally known as 2175 Cornwall Road, in accordance with Council's January 27, 2021 resolution. As such, staff are putting forward the following recommendations for your consideration, and that concludes my presentation. I'm available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Ms. Musson, thank you very much for that concise report. Madam Clerk, would you call the registered delegation?
The delegation is Peter March.
Welcome, Mr. March. Council looks forward to your information. And if you haven't already, please unmute yourself so that we can hear the information you'll share.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you very much. And we can see you too.
Great. Thank you very much. I wish to address the 2175 submission about the traffic report, the second one that came out in April of this year. And I have a couple of items I'd like to bring to council's attention. So Good evening, Your Worship, Mayor Burton, Town Council and Regional Council. Thank you very much for allowing me your time. The first item that I would like to bring about is the site traffic forecast. It was, I believe it was pegged at 2% between 2020 and 2025, but nowhere in the consultant's recommendation does it mention the Oakville's Midtown project. And I think the traffic is aspirate that 2% drastically. I've seen on your websites that the Midtown may support up to 20,000 residents and 8,000 jobs, and this will increase traffic exponentially in the area. The next item I wish to bring to your attention is about the operational analysis. And it was about the traffic that moves east on Cornwall to Ford Drive. And there are 2 short left turn lanes that will precede vehicles to go northbound on Ford Drive. And therefore, the proposal is that, well, there is no proposal. They cannot change anything that's happening there because of the queuing lanes are very short. In saying that, in the report, the study that was done, no mention was made of the fire hall. They mentioned the train tracks. They're approximately 10 meters. There is no parking, obviously, on train tracks. Secondly, the fire hall, number 2 fire hall that's there, is 20 meters of no parking. You can't stop in front of the building, obviously, for safety reasons, emergency reasons. So there's a total of 30 meters, but only 10 meters were brought up in the review plan of the April review. The problem there is the backing up of traffic. If you can't park or can't stop your vehicle for a red light, you're going to be exponentially put back further and further, and this going to cause large traffic conditions and giving the tenant who wants to go into 2175 going to be more traffic in that area. It's going to be backed up right to the next set of lights. It could be easily. And I feel that in order to alleviate that, this shouldn't be proposed. Absolutely not. The next item I have for you is the site plan review, and it's this is where the proposed new westbound access from the facility onto the roadway of Cornwall. They're proposing that they want to be able to turn left, leaving the property, and left turning and left entering. I don't believe this is applicable because in the report you need a sightline distance of 160 meters. It's stated in the consultant's report that you would bring your vehicle out to the roadway and you would be protected by the new proposed right turn lane that enters the property. However, if you have a right lane entering the property, you will move the boulevard and the sidewalk back 2 to 3 meters. Having said that, you won't have any sight line whatsoever. You'll be looking into the bush where Joshua Creek is. You don't have that availability to see at a left turn lane. So any proposal for a left turn in and left turn out of that property should be disqualified altogether. Right in and right out. The other, these are only 3 that I pointed out. I have many others. I found that this consultant's report was inaccurate, it was vague, and it left out some valuable information. It was no better than the first report that was in 2020. So not a good sign there. The other 2 things I just want to bring to your appointment that your attention, sorry, is about the HVAC system that's going in there. I understand that there has been a submission in March of 2020 for mechanical drawings. They passed your review. I believe that the Ministry of Environment should be called in to have a look at this because if you're parking 100 plus, maybe 120 vehicles inside a building, you need some dramatic ventilation. I've been in this situation before in my past in my working career, so I've seen what happens with this can go. I think you should consult somebody who, like the Ministry of Environment, who may be more applicable to assess this. The other one I'm looking at is the conservation, Alton, of the whole lands. We have the Parkway Belt, and they want to extend parking to 689 spots. Then you have the grounds around that building absorb all the rainfall. We don't have any flooding. We don't have any real bad issues in our neighborhood. But when you start putting pavement down, we will have problems. The plan on the drawings states that all of the driveway or the parking and drive areas will go into a pipe and go to a pond that exists on the east side, sorry, the west side of the building, because it's right beside Joshua Creek. If all that rainwater cannot absorb into the ground, it's the belief there may be some flooding that could occur downstream, particularly maybe down by Brookmill and Constance area, where the creek levels out quite considerably. There is no deep ditch there. There could be some concern there, and I think Halton Conservation should be reviewing the parking and what the impacts are of that parking on the neighborhoods. That concludes my information to share with you this evening. I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. March, for the time you took to bring us that information. Madam Clerk, are there any other delegations?
No, there are no other delegations.
All right. Well, thank you, Madam Clerk. I'll confine the matter to table. Councillor Haslett-Thiel.
Thank you, Mayor Burton, and thank you, Mr. March, for continuing to raise neighborhood concerns on behalf of the community. I have a few questions for Lee, and at the appropriate time, I'd be pleased to move the motion, Mayor Burton. Lee, could you just walk us through briefly? A decision was made at supporting this settlement at the Ontario Land Tribunal. Could you just clarify what that means in terms of next steps on the development?
Councillor, I don't see Lee in the meeting anymore, and we can get you that information offline, and you can provide it through your newsletter, perhaps.
Okay. I just thought it would help Mr. March understand sort of the next steps.
She's back.
Sorry. Yes.
Here she is.
For some reason, I got kicked out and was asked to join as a panelist.
Lee, did you get a chance to hear the councillor's question?
No, I did not. Please, if you could repeat, that'd be appreciated.
She'd like the next steps to be outlined, if you could do that.
Councillor Haslett, next steps with regards to rezoning, sorry, or the next steps with respect to the site plan?
What's going to happen? What are the next steps that we anticipate, and when will they happen in terms of the development, the process that we're in the middle of here, or perhaps that's not accurate, near the end of here?
Okay, I'll do my best here. Through your worship to the councillor, so the site plan went to the OLT on September the 16th, and it has received its conditional approval. Part of that conditional approval was the minutes of settlement between the town and the applicant. The The OLT did approve conditions, which the applicant will have to satisfy before we can issue a final site plan approval. So that work is still ongoing. In terms of the zoning this evening, the zoning is really to impose more restrictions on this site. It's to make sure that the building doesn't get any larger. It's to make sure that there's no additional parking, and it's basically the line with the minister's zoning order. So what we're doing tonight is to impose restrictions on this landowner. The applicant, in terms of the site plan, there will be another submission just to address these conditions or whatever they need to submit in order to address those conditions. As you recall, we did have a peer review of the traffic study, and the peer reviewer is satisfied with the traffic report, save and except for one issue with regards to the west entrance. And the west entrance issue that our peer reviewer had raised was that there shouldn't be any left turn movements out of the site of large or heavy vehicles. The noise report, as you know, was peer reviewed as well, and those issues have been resolved to our peer reviewer's satisfaction. So I think that pretty well sums it up in a nutshell. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. So for clarity, the road design now work will proceed. So they will work through where they can find space on the north or the south in order to address what the traffic study said. Is that correct?
Yes, through you, Your Worship. The design work of Cornwall Road and where the left-hand turn lanes and the right-hand turn lanes are actually going to fall within the right-of-way. Yes, that work is still going to be ongoing through our transportation and engineering section.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. So Lima, just for 100% clarity for people. So when this zoning bylaw amendment hopefully passes tonight, the landowner today, and even if they sell that land, cannot build higher or more gross floor area than what this zoning amendment states. Is that correct?
Your Worship, to the councillor. So the bylaw this evening before you will put a maximum of floor area on the whole site of 29,200 square meters. So the applicant cannot build anything larger than that unless they get additional approvals from the town, and also if they get additional approvals from the ministry.
And so to get those approvals, they would have to apply for a zoning amendment now.
In terms of the town's bylaw, depending on the extent of any increases in floor area or parking, it would either be a zoning amendment or a minor variance. Again, both processes are a public process.
Okay, so this amendment does what council supported, which is to constrain the land because of the scale and intensity that this operation, as well as what we obviously want to make sure is as best we can reasonable for the neighborhood. So thank you for confirming that, because there was some confusion. Some people thought that they could go higher or they could put an accessory building on if this passed, and that is in fact not the case if it passes tonight.
That's correct.
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you very much, Councillor, and I accept your motion. Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Further to Councillor Haslefield's questions, Lee, the SP 409 also limits the parking, both internal and external, to a total of 689 spaces, correct?
That's correct.
So that forms part of it as well. All right, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, Council, may I put the vote? All those in, is there any objection to the motion by Councillor Hassett to approve the bylaw? Madam Clerk, there's no objection. That carries. Thank you, everybody. Council, it would now be in order for someone to move that we rise and report to Council. Councillor Longo, thank you for that. Is there any objection to Councillor Longo's motion? Madam Clerk, there's no objection, and so that carries. I rise and report the Committee of the Whole has met and made recommendations on consent item 4.1, confidential consent items 5.1 and 5.2, public hearing items 6.1 and 6.2, discussion items 7.1, 7.2, 7.3, and 7.4, and advisory committee minutes, item 9.1, as noted by the clerk. Could I have a mover and seconder for the report? Councillor Elgar and Councillor Knoll, thank you. Any objection to the motion? There being none, the motion is carried and adopted. Council, are there any matters of an emergency or congratulatory or condolence nature to be brought forward at this time? All right. How about a mover and seconder for consideration and reading of the bylaws? Councillor Chisholm and Councillor Lischina, thank you very much. Any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there being none, the bylaws are considered and read and adopted. And it's been terrific working with you tonight. You've done a lot of hard work, and I think you asked very good questions and made very good decisions. Thank you very much for your time, and that ends the meeting.